true scary stories for sleep. Welcome to the Midnight Echoes. Before we dive into tonight's stories, I'd love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop a comment below. It's always fascinating to see where our viewers are tuning in from. If you enjoy the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, unwind, and prepare for tonight's eerie adventures. You ever find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time? That's exactly what happened to us. A group of hikers just looking for a bit of adventure. We were trekking through the woods when the sky darkened and a sudden storm rolled in. The rain was relentless and we were miles away from civilization. That's when we stumbled upon it. A cabin hidden deep in the forest, barely visible through the trees. It seemed like a blessing at first, but little did we know that cabin would become our worst nightmare. The cabin looked abandoned, with its decaying wooden exterior and broken windows, but we had no choice. We needed shelter from the storm. The moment we stepped inside, a chill ran down my spine. Something felt off. The place was eerily silent, save for the howling wind outside. The air was thick with unease, and it wasn't just because of the storm. We tried to convince ourselves that it was just an old cabin, nothing more. But as night fell, the atmosphere grew even more oppressive, almost as if the cabin itself was alive, watching us. As we settled in, strange noises began to echo through the walls, scratching, creaking, and what sounded like footsteps. We brushed it off as the wind playing tricks on our minds. Deep down, we knew something was wrong. Then, one of us found the first trap, a rusted bear trap hidden under a pile of debris. It snapped shut with a bone-chilling clang, barely missing his foot. That's when the realization hit us. We weren't alone. Someone or something was out there, setting traps, and they had no intention of letting us leave. Panic set in. We frantically searched for a way out, but every door, every window seemed to lead us further into a labyrinth of fear. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm raging within us. We could hear movement outside, shadowy figures darting between the trees. Whoever they were toying with us, driving us mad with fear. Every step we took felt like it could be our last. Every creak of the floorboards a harbinger of doom. The night seemed endless, each minute stretching into an eternity of terror. At one point, we tried to make a run for it, but the forest had become a maze of traps. Barbed wire, pitfall traps, and snares, each one deadlier than the last. It was as if the entire forest had turned against us. We were forced back into the cabin, where the walls seemed to close in, suffocating us with dread. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified to a deafening roar in the silence of the night. We huddled together, our breaths shallow, waiting for the inevitable. Hours passed, though it felt like days. We were trapped, our only company, the eerie silence and the occasional thud of something or someone outside. Sleep was impossible. Fear had us wide awake, every nerve on edge. The traps outside grew more elaborate, more vicious, as if whoever was out there was getting bolder, more confident that we had no way out. We tried to stay calm, but the chilling reality was sinking in. We might not make it out of this alive. Then, just when we thought things couldn't get worse, the power went out. Darkness swallowed the cabin whole, leaving us in complete blackness. We could hear them now, moving closer, their footsteps growing louder, more deliberate. It was a game to them, and we were their prey. We barricaded ourselves in one of the rooms, hoping against hope that the flimsy door would keep them out. But deep down, we knew it was only a matter of time before they found us. In the darkness, time lost all meaning. We could hear faint whispers, like ghostly voices echoing through the walls. The air grew colder, more oppressive, as if the cabin itself was closing in on us. The fear was suffocating, paralyzing us with every passing second. We held our breath, praying that whoever, or whatever, was out there would lose interest and leave. But the chilling reality was that we were trapped, and the hunters outside were just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The final hours of that night were a blur of terror and confusion. We could hear the traps being reset outside, each metallic snap a reminder of our impending doom. Every shadow, every creak in the floorboards sent us into a panic. And then, it happened. One of us made a desperate dash for the door, only to be caught in a snare just inches from freedom. The sight of it, blood, fear, and the sickening realization that we were truly at the mercy of something beyond reason, will haunt me forever. But somehow, against all odds, we survived. As dawn broke, the storm finally subsided, and the figures outside vanished into the mist. We stumbled out of that cabin, bruised, bloodied, and forever changed. Forest was silent again, as if nothing had ever happened. But we knew better. That cabin, that night, would remain a haunting memory, a chilling reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters. They're the people who revel in fear, who hunt for sport, and who will stop at nothing to see you break. You ever had that gut feeling that something's just not right? That's what hit us the moment we pulled up to the old mansion. My partner and I had been on the road for hours, looking for a place to crash for the night. When we saw the sign for a historic bed and breakfast, we thought we'd struck gold. But as we drove up the long, winding driveway, the mansion loomed ahead, its shadow stretching out like a warning. It was beautiful in a haunting kind of way. All Victorian architecture and overgrown gardens. But there was something off, something chilling in the air. The owner greeted us at the door. Tall, thin man with a smile that never reached his eyes. He spoke in a soft, almost too friendly tone, showing us around the place. The mansion was massive, filled with antique furniture and dark hallways that seemed to go on forever. We tried to shake off the eerie feeling, convincing ourselves it was just our imaginations running wild. But as the night went on, the unease only grew. The place was too quiet, too still, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. We settled into our room, trying to relax after the long drive, but sleep didn't come easy. The bed was comfortable, sure, but the silence was suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. And then, just as we were about to drift off, we heard it. Faint scratching at the door. My partner laughed it off, saying it was probably just a branch tapping against the window. But deep down, I knew better. That sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside, and it was getting closer. We tried to ignore it, but the scratching turned into soft footsteps, pacing back and forth outside our door. My heart raced, and I could feel the tension in the air thickening. We stayed quiet, hoping it would go away. The footsteps just kept getting louder. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, drew open the door, and found nothing. The hallway was empty, dimly lit by the flickering lights. But I could still feel it. Something was watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. The next morning, we decided to check out early. We'd had enough of the creepy mansion and its eerie vibes. But when we tried to leave, the owner was nowhere to be found. We searched the mansion, calling out for him, but all we got in return was silence. That's when we noticed the doors. Every single one of them locked from the outside. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped. The beautiful old mansion had become a prison, and whoever had the keys wasn't planning on letting us go. Desperate, we tried to find another way out. The mansion seemed to twist and turn in ways that defied logic. Hallways that should have led to the front door took us deeper into the house. Doors that were open just moments ago were now locked tight. It was as if the mansion itself was alive, playing with us, leading us in circles. The tension between us grew, every sound, every shadow putting us on edge. We were trapped, and the reality of our situation was sinking in fast. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, barely audible over the sound of our own frantic breathing. But as we ventured deeper into the mansion, they grew louder, more insistent. Voices coming from the walls, the ceilings, everywhere. They weren't just random noises. They were speaking to us, taunting us. "You can't leave," they whispered. "This is your home now." The words sent chills down my spine, and for the first time, I truly believed we might not make it out of there. We stumbled upon a hidden staircase, leading down into the basement. It wasn't a place we wanted to go, but we had no choice. As we descended into the darkness, the air grew colder, more oppressive. The basement was vast, filled with old furniture, crates, and something far worse, evidence of those who came before us. tattered clothes, personal belongings, and a journal detailing the horrors that had taken place within these walls. The realization hit us like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a bed and breakfast. It was a trap, and we were the latest victims. Final hours in that mansion were a blur of terror and desperation. We could hear the footsteps above us, the whispers growing louder. We were running out of time, and we knew it. Finally, in a last-ditch effort, we broke through a boarded-up window in the basement and crawled out into the cold, damp night. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road, our hearts pounding, our bodies shaking with adrenaline. As we looked back at the mansion, now barely visible through the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching us, disappointed that we'd escaped its clutches. We never spoke of what happened that night, but the memories haunt me to this day. The beautiful, eerie mansion that had promised rest and relaxation had delivered nothing but terror. And the worst part? I know we were lucky. Others might not be so fortunate. I still can't believe we thought renting a private island would be a good idea. It sounded perfect on paper. A secluded paradise, no one around for miles, just us and the ocean. We arrived full of excitement, ready to spend the weekend soaking up the sun, enjoying the peaceful isolation. But that peace didn't last long. First sign that something was off came on the second night. One of us noticed footprints in the sand, footprints that didn't belong to any of us. At first, we tried to brush it off, thinking maybe we'd missed them earlier, but deep down, we knew better. The realization that someone else was on the island hit us hard. Suddenly, the beautiful seclusion that had attracted us to this place felt more like a trap. The next morning, more signs appeared. Our supplies had been moved, and there were strange marks in the sand near our camp. We tried to stay calm, but the atmosphere had shifted. The island no longer felt like a paradise. It felt menacing, as if it was hiding something. And then the stalking began. At first, it was subtle, a rustle in the bushes, a shadow darting between the trees. We convinced ourselves it was just our imagination, that we were overreacting. But as night fell, the stalking became more intense. We could hear someone or something moving just beyond the firelight, watching us. The eerie feeling of being hunted settled in, and fear began to take root. We huddled together, trying to keep our spirits up. The tension was palpable. Every noise, every gust of wind sent us into a panic. The next day, we decided to explore the island, hoping to find some sign of who or what was out there. What we found instead were traps. Cleverly hidden snares, pitfalls, and crude but deadly devices scattered throughout the jungle. Someone had gone to great lengths to turn this island into a death trap. The realization that we were being hunted, not just watched, hit us like a punch to the gut. We were no longer guests on this island. We were prey. We tried to stay together, but the island had other plans. As we navigated through the jungle, the traps forced us to split up, each of us desperately trying to find a way back to camp without getting caught. Fear was overwhelming, choking us with every step. The island's beauty had turned against us, its lush greenery hiding dangers at every turn. The once soothing sound of the ocean had become a haunting backdrop to our nightmare. And the worst part, we still hadn't seen our hunter. Night fell again, and the island's darkness felt oppressive, almost alive. We gathered what supplies we could and decided to make a break for the boat. But when we reached the shore, the boat was gone. Panic set in as we realized we were truly trapped, cut off from any means of escape. The footsteps started again, circling us, getting closer with each pass. Whoever was out there was toying with us, savoring our fear. We tried to stay calm, to think logically, but it was impossible. The island had become a living nightmare. The final night was a blur of terror and desperation. We could hear our hunter now, moving closer, taunting us with every step. We made a run for it, but the traps were everywhere, waiting to catch us off guard. One by one, we fell into the island's clutches, some caught in snares, others forced into deadly traps. Fear was suffocating, each second dragging us closer to the end. I'll never forget the moment I realized I was the last one standing, the last one still fighting to survive. As dawn broke, the island's beauty returned, mocking me with its serene calm. I knew better. This place was cursed. Trap designed to lure people in and never let them leave. Somehow I managed to outlast the night, evading the traps and the unseen predator that had stalked us for so long. When I finally found the boat, hidden on the other side of the island, I didn't hesitate. I left everything behind, rowing away with nothing but the clothes on my back and the haunting memories of that weekend. To this day, I don't know who or what was hunting us on that island. All I know is that we were lucky to escape with our lives. The island may look like paradise, but beneath its beauty lies something chilling, something that still haunts me in my dreams. And the worst part? I know it's still out there, waiting for its next victim. I've always been drawn to the eerie beauty of abandoned places, so when I heard about the old lighthouse perched on a cliff overlooking the sea, couldn't resist. It had been out of operation for decades, left to crumble in the salty air and harsh winds. Perfect for capturing some haunting photos, I thought. I arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. The lighthouse stood tall, its once bright red paint now faded and peeling. There was something unsettling about it, something that made me hesitate. But I brushed it off, just my imagination, right? As I made my way inside, the air grew colder, almost unnaturally so. The walls were covered in graffiti, the floor littered with broken glass and debris. Every step echoed through the hollow structure, a reminder of how alone I was. I started snapping pictures, trying to capture the eerie atmosphere. Something felt off. It was too quiet. The usual sounds of the sea, the wind, the distant cries of seabirds. All of it seemed muted, as if the lighthouse was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As night fell, the place took on a whole new level of creepiness. The shadows deepened, and the air grew thicker with a sense of unease. I told myself it was just the isolation, the darkness playing tricks on my mind. But then I heard it. Faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the top of the lighthouse. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound was too deliberate, too precise. Curiosity got the better of me, and I began to climb the spiral staircase, each step creaking under my weight. The higher I went, the louder the tapping became, like someone, or something, was waiting for me at the top. When I reached the top, I found the old lamp room. The large glass windows were cracked and filthy, barely letting in any light from the moon outside. But the source of the tapping was nowhere to be found. The room was empty, save for a few rusted tools and broken pieces of machinery. I felt a chill run down my spine as the tapping suddenly stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I tried to shake off the feeling that I was being watched, but it clung to me like cold fog. I wasn't alone in that lighthouse. Feel it. I decided to head back down, but halfway down the stairs, the air grew even colder, and I heard a whisper, faint, almost unintelligible, but there nonetheless. It sent a shiver down my spine, and I quickened my pace, eager to leave the lighthouse behind. But the whispers followed me, growing louder with each step. By the time I reached the bottom, they were almost deafening, surrounding me from all sides. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable, hostile, angry, as if I had disturbed something that wanted to be left alone. Panic set in, and I bolted for the door, only to find it jammed. No matter how hard I pulled, it wouldn't budge. The whispers turned into a low, menacing growl, and I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, expecting to see someone, something, standing there, but the room was empty. Yet the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, grew stronger. I was trapped in the lighthouse, with whatever malevolent presence haunted its walls, and there was no way out. In a desperate attempt to escape, I climbed back up the stairs, hoping to find another exit at the top. But as I reached the lamp room again, I realized my mistake. The door slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled the entire structure. The growling grew louder, more aggressive, as if the lighthouse itself was alive, beating on my fear. The windows began to crack, spider webs of glass spreading out as the pressure mounted. I could feel the walls closing in, the air growing thinner with each passing second. I don't know how long I was trapped up there, but it felt like hours. The growling, the whispers, the suffocating darkness. It all blended together into a nightmare I couldn't escape. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the door burst open, and a blast of cold air knocked me to the floor. I scrambled to my feet, not caring how or why the door had opened, only that it had. I ran down the stairs, not daring to look back, and burst out into the night, gasping for breath. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drove away, I glanced back at the lighthouse one last time. It stood there, silent and still, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. That place was cursed, haunted by something far more sinister than just the passage of time. I never did develop those photos, and I never went back to that lighthouse, but the memories of that night still haunt me. A chilling reminder that some places are better left alone. You ever been snowed in? It sounds cozy, right? Crackling fire, hot cocoa, and the world outside blanketed in white. That's what we thought when we booked the mountain lodge for a weekend getaway. The place was tucked away in the wilderness, miles from the nearest town, promising solitude and relaxation. We arrived just as the first snowflakes began to fall, the lodge looking like something out of a postcard. It was perfect. Until the storm hit. What started as a gentle snowfall turned into a blizzard, trapping us inside with no way out. At first, we didn't mind. The lodge was warm, the fire crackled in the hearth, and we had enough supplies to last us a few days. But as the snow piled up outside, cutting us off from the world, the atmosphere inside the lodge began to change. It wasn't just the isolation, it was the feeling that something wasn't right. The lodge was too quiet, too still, as if it was waiting for something to happen. And then we found the first clue that we weren't as alone as we thought. It was a journal, tucked away in one of the rooms, written by someone who had stayed in the lodge before us. The entries started out normal enough, descriptions of the scenery, the weather, the peacefulness of the place. But as the days went on, the tone of the journal shifted. The writer began to describe strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, footsteps in the hallways at night, and a growing sense of dread. The final entry was barely legible, scrawled in a shaky hand. "It's here. It's always been here. And it's coming for me." We tried to laugh it off, convincing ourselves it was just someone's idea of a prank. The lodge didn't feel the same after that. The fire that had once been comforting now cast eerie shadows on the walls. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows seemed sinister. And then, the first of us disappeared. It happened during the night, without a sound. One minute, he was there, sleeping in the next room. The next, his bed was empty. The covers pulled back as if he'd simply gotten up and walked away. But there were no footprints in the snow outside. No sign of where he'd gone. Panic set in, and we searched the lodge from top to bottom, calling his name, but there was no trace of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The storm outside raged on, making it impossible to leave, and the lodge seemed to grow darker, colder with each passing hour. The tension between us mounted, every sound, every shadow putting us on edge. And that's when we realized the lodge wasn't just a place. It was alive. It was hungry. Following days were a blur of fear and confusion. We tried to stick together, but the lodge had other plans. Doors that should have led to familiar rooms opened into unfamiliar hallways. Windows that once showed the snowy landscape outside now revealed only darkness. We could hear whispers, faint and haunting, coming from the walls. And then, one by one, we began to disappear. It didn't happen all at once. It was slow, methodical, as if the lodge was savoring our fear. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. There was only 2 of us left, and we were barely holding on to our sanity. The storm outside had become a distant memory, replaced by the storm within the lodge itself. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. We tried to escape, but every exit led us deeper into the labyrinth. The lodge was playing with us, leading us in circles, wearing us down until we had nothing left. In the end, it was just me. I don't remember how I got out, only that I did. The storm had finally passed and the snow had begun to melt, revealing a path down the mountain. I stumbled my way back to civilization, half frozen and delirious, but alive. No one believed my story, of course. They chalked it up to the isolation, old, fear. But I know what I experienced. The lodge isn't just a building, it's a predator waiting for its next meal. I haven't gone back to the mountains since that trip, and I never will. Memories of that weekend still haunt me. A chilling reminder that some places aren't meant to be explored. If you ever find yourself in a mountain lodge, snowed in and cut off from the world, be careful. You might not be as alone as you think. I thought I'd found the perfect escape. A little cottage nestled in the countryside, far away from the noise and distractions of city life. It was just what I needed to finish my book. The place was quaint, with ivy creeping up the stone walls and a small garden out back. It seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful. The first few days were productive, the quiet solitude allowing me to focus like never before. But as the week went on, I started noticing things. Small things at first. A door slightly ajar when I was sure I'd closed it, a window left open that I hadn't touched. I brushed it off as forgetfulness, but a gnawing feeling of unease began to settle in. The nights were the worst. The cottage was old, and it creaked and groaned in the wind. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling, but the noises didn't sound natural. They were too deliberate, too purposeful. It started with a faint tapping, like someone gently knocking on the walls. Then came the footsteps, soft but unmistakable, moving through the hallways at night. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my writing, but the sounds grew louder, more insistent. Felt like someone, or something, was in the house with me. One night, I woke up to find my laptop open, a document I hadn't touched glowing on the screen. The words were jumbled, incoherent, but there was a pattern, a message buried within the chaos. It was as if someone was trying to communicate with me. The message was garbled, twisted by whatever malevolent force had taken hold of the cottage. I shut the laptop, trying to convince myself it was just a glitch. The fear had already taken root. The cottage was no longer a place of refuge. It was a prison. The next day I found scratches on the walls, long, deep gouges that hadn't been there before. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe an animal had gotten inside. The scratches were too precise, too deliberate. They formed a pattern, spiraling around the room, converging on the spot where I slept. The air grew colder, the shadows darker, and the feeling of being watched became unbearable. I couldn't shake the sense that whatever was in the cottage wasn't just playing with me. It was waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to leave, but every time I reached the front door, something stopped me. It wasn't a physical barrier, just a feeling, a deep, gut-wrenching dread that made my legs refuse to move. It was as if the cottage itself didn't want me to go. I spent hours pacing, trying to work up the courage to leave, but the walls seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with their silence. The only thing that kept me going was the thought that if I stayed, I'd never leave. Final night was a blur of fear and desperation. The noises had become deafening. Footsteps now a constant presence in the cottage. I could hear whispers, faint and eerie, coming from the walls, floor, the ceiling. They were saying my name, over and over, a haunting chant that filled the air with dread. I knew I had to get out, but the cottage seemed to fight me every step of the way. The doors wouldn't budge, the windows were sealed shut, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord, blocking my path. In the end, it was sheer desperation that saved me. I smashed a window with a chair and climbed out, cutting myself on the broken glass, but not caring. I ran through the garden, the whisper still echoing in my ears, and didn't stop until I was miles away. When I looked back, the cottage was just a dark silhouette against the horizon, but I could still feel its presence, still hear its haunting whispers. I never went back to that cottage, and I never finished the book. The memories of that place still haunt me, a chilling reminder that some stories are better left unwritten. If you ever find yourself in a remote cottage, far from the world, be careful. You might not be as alone as you think. I've always loved hiking, just me, the trees, and the wide open sky. Though when a sudden storm rolled in, I wasn't too worried. I knew the forest like the back of my hand, and I figured I could find shelter until the worst of it passed. That's when I stumbled upon the cabin. It looked abandoned, tucked away in a clearing, half hidden by overgrown bushes and vine. The windows were dark, the wood weathered and cracked, but it was better than staying out in the storm. Little did I know, that decision would turn my peaceful hike into a nightmare. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was off. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. There was something else, something more sinister. The cabin was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant rumble of thunder outside. I tried to convince myself it was just an old, forgotten building, nothing more. But as the storm raged on, I started to hear things. Small, barely noticeable at first. Faint creak of floorboards, a soft rustling in the corners. It felt like the cabin was alive, watching me from every shadow. I lit a small fire in the hearth, hoping the warmth would chase away the uneasy feeling that had settled in my gut. But the fire only seemed to make the shadows deeper, more menacing. As I sat there, listening to the wind howl outside, I noticed something odd. A strange symbol carved into the wall above the fireplace. It was rough, almost primitive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was some kind of warning. That's when I heard the first trap spring. A sharp, metallic snap that echoed through the cabin. Panic set in as I realized I wasn't alone. Someone, or something, had set traps around the cabin, and they were close. I rushed to the door. The storm outside was too fierce, the wind howling like a beast in the night. I was trapped, forced to stay in the cabin with whatever was lurking in the shadows. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the walls made my heart race. I tried to stay calm, tell myself it was just the storm playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew better. As the night wore on, the cabin seemed to close in on me. Fire flickered and died, leaving me in near darkness. That's when I saw it, a shadow moving across the wall, slow and deliberate. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was tall, its movements unnaturally smooth, as if it was gliding across the floor. I wanted to believe it was just the wind, just my imagination, but the cabin was too quiet now. Storm outside a distant memory. I was no longer alone. Desperation took over, and I began searching for a way out. At every door, every window seemed to lead me back to the same room, the same suffocating darkness. The traps outside had been reset, their deadly mechanisms waiting to catch me if I made a wrong move. The figure in the shadows grew bolder, its presence palpable, almost suffocating. It was toying with me, drawing out my fear, feeding off it. I knew I had to get out, but the cabin wasn't letting me go that easily. I tried to make a run for it, but I barely made it 2 steps before I heard the trap snap shut behind me. The sound was deafening in the silence, chilling reminder that I was playing a deadly game. I stumbled back into the cabin, my mind racing, trying to come up with a plan. But every option led to the same conclusion. I was trapped, and the cabin wasn't going to let me leave alive. Hours passed, though it felt like days. Figure in the shadows grew closer, its presence suffocating. I could feel its cold breath on the back of my neck, hear its whispers in the darkness. The cabin had become a prison, and I was its prisoner. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the storm outside suddenly stopped, leaving the forest in eerie silence. The figure in the shadows vanished as if it had never been there. I bolted for the door, my heart pounding in my chest, and didn't stop running until I was far away from that cursed place. I never went back to that forest, and I've never hiked alone again. The memory of that night still haunts me. Chilling reminder that some places are better left undisturbed. If you ever find yourself in a storm, seeking shelter in an abandoned cabin, be careful. You might not be the only one seeking refuge. You ever checked into a place and immediately regretted it? That's how I felt the moment I stepped into that dingy roadside motel. It was late, was tired, and I just needed a place to crash for the night. The neon sign flickered in the dark, casting eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. Inside, the lobby smelled of stale cigarettes and mildew, the kind of place you only stay in if you're desperate. But I was too exhausted to care. The old man behind the counter handed me the key without a word. his eyes never quite meeting mine. Something about the whole setup gave me chills, but I shrugged it off. I just needed sleep. The room wasn't much better. The walls were thin, the bed sagged in the middle, and the air conditioner rattled like it was on its last legs. I dropped my bag on the floor and collapsed onto the bed, ready to pass out. But as soon as I closed my eyes, I heard it. Faint, scratching sound coming from the wall behind me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the building settling. The noise didn't stop. Grew louder, more persistent, like someone or something was trying to get in. I got up, pressed my ear to the wall, and listened. The scratching was rhythmic, deliberate, as if it was coming from inside the wall itself. I banged on the wall, hoping to scare off whatever was making the noise, but it only stopped for a moment before starting up again, even louder this time. That's when I noticed something strange. The walls were covered in scratches, deep gouges that looked too deliberate to be the work of mice or rats. My heart started to race, a chilling sense of dread creeping up my spine. I tried to call the front desk, but the phone was dead. No dial tone, nothing. That's when I noticed the shadows under the door, shifting, moving, like someone was pacing back and forth just outside. I held my breath, listening, but whoever or whatever was out there wasn't making a sound. Just those eerie shadows, sliding across the floor like something out of a nightmare. I backed away from the door, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do. I could feel the walls closing in on me, air thick with tension. I knew I had to get out of there, but when I tried the door, it wouldn't budge. It was locked from the outside. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but all I got in return was silence. The scratching in the walls grew louder, more frantic, and I could hear faint whispers now, voices too low to understand but full of malice. The shadows under the door twisted and writhed, taking on shapes that defied logic. It was as if the motel itself was alive, feeding off my fear. Desperation took over, and I tried the window. It was stuck, but with enough force, I managed to pry it open. The night air was cold and sharp, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside the room. I scrambled out, my heart pounding in my chest, and dropped to the ground below. As I stood up, I glanced back at the motel, half expecting to see someone, or something, watching me from the window. But the place was dark and silent, as if nothing had happened. I didn't stop running until I was miles down the road, the motel a distant memory behind me. When I finally reached a gas station and called for help, no one believed my story. They said the motel had been abandoned for years, that no one had stayed there in ages. But I know what I experienced. The scratches, the whispers, the shadows, it was all real. That motel isn't just a building, it's a trap waiting for its next unsuspecting guest. I've never stayed in a roadside motel since that night. The memory still haunts me, a chilling reminder that some places are best left behind. If you ever find yourself on a lonely highway, desperate for a place to sleep, be careful. You might check in, but you may not check out. It sounded like the perfect getaway, a secluded bungalow by the sea, far from the hustle and bustle of city life. My partner and I were looking forward to a romantic weekend, just the two of us and the ocean. The bungalow was perched on a cliff, with panoramic views of the water stretching out to the horizon. We could hear the waves crashing against the rocks below, the salty breeze carrying the scent of the sea. It was picturesque, almost too perfect, but as we unpacked and settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. At first, I chalked it up to nerves. After all, we were miles from the nearest town, completely alone. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the beach, that feeling of unease grew stronger. We spent the evening on the veranda, watching the waves, but every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something. Someone, moving along the shore. It was always just out of sight, disappearing before I could get a good look. My partner didn't notice, and I didn't want to ruin the mood, so I kept it to myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. The bungalow was too quiet, the only sound the rhythmic crashing of the waves outside. I tossed and turned, trying to ignore the strange sensation that someone was standing just outside the window, watching us. When I finally drifted off, I was jolted awake by a noise. A soft thud, like something heavy had hit the deck outside. I sat up, my heart racing, and listened. There it was again, faint scraping sound, like someone or something was dragging something across the wooden planks. I got up, careful not to wake my partner, and crept to the window. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the deck, but I didn't see anyone. Still, that feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I told myself it was just the wind, just the sound of the ocean, but deep down, I knew better. I locked the doors and windows, trying to shake off the dread that had settled in my chest. But sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was filled with haunting dreams of figures lurking in the shadows. The next morning, I found footprints in the sand, fresh footprints, leading from the beach up to the bungalow, and then back down again. They were too large to be mine, and my partner swore they hadn't gone outside. The realization hit me like a wave. We weren't alone. Someone had been watching us, circling the bungalow while we slept. I tried to stay calm, to act like everything was fine. The tension between us was palpable. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside put us on edge. As the day wore on, the feeling of unease grew stronger. We tried to enjoy the beach, but I couldn't shake the sensation that we were being followed. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, dark figures disappearing into the dunes, shadows darting between the rocks. My partner tried to brush it off, saying it was just my imagination, but I knew something wasn't right. The ocean, once soothing, now seemed ominous, its endless waves hiding whatever or whoever was out there. That night, the knocking started. Soft at first, just a faint tap on the windows, but it grew louder, more insistent. We checked the doors, the windows, but no one was there. Yet the knocking continued, echoing through the bungalow like a sinister heartbeat. It felt like a taunt, like whoever was out there was daring us to come out, to face them. The fear was suffocating, wrapping around us like a cold, wet blanket. We barricaded ourselves in the bedroom, but the knocking didn't stop. It seemed to come from everywhere, surrounding us, trapping us inside our own personal nightmare. We made it through the night, but barely. The next morning we packed up and left, not daring to stay another minute. As we drove away, I glanced back at the bungalow one last time. It looked peaceful, almost idyllic, but I knew better. That place wasn't just a seaside retreat. It was a trap, and we had narrowly escaped its clutches. The memories of that weekend still haunt me, a chilling reminder that paradise can quickly turn into a nightmare. It was supposed to be a weekend of fun and relaxation, a simple camping trip with a few friends, far away from the chaos of our everyday lives. We set up our tents in a clearing deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. The forest was beautiful, towering trees and a serene, almost eerie stillness that seemed to wrap around us like a blanket. As the sun set and the fire crackled, we felt like we were the only people in the world. Little did we know, something, or someone was watching us from the shadows. First night was peaceful enough, but when we woke up the next morning, we found our gear scattered around the campsite. Food was missing, tents were slashed, and our supplies were in disarray. We tried to laugh it off, thinking it must have been an animal, maybe a raccoon or a bear, but there were no tracks, no sign of anything that could have done this. The unease that had been lurking in the back of my mind began to grow, but I pushed it aside. We were here to have fun, not to scare ourselves silly with wild imaginations. As the day went on, the atmosphere grew more tense. We tried to enjoy the hiking and swimming. Something felt off. Forest, once so inviting, now seemed hostile, like it was closing in on us. We kept hearing strange noises, twigs snapping, rustling leaves. But every time we turned to look, there was nothing there. The feeling of being watched became unbearable. Eyes were following our every move. We joked about it, trying to shake off the creeping dread. The laughter felt forced. That night, things took a turn for the worse. We woke up to find the fire had gone out, and the darkness around us felt thicker, more oppressive. One of us swore they saw a figure lurking at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the firelight. We grabbed our flashlights and searched the area, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of life. The unease that had been gnawing at us all day erupted into full-blown fear. We huddled together, trying to stay calm, but every sound, every rustle in the trees made us jump. In the early hours of the morning, we heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down our spine. It was close, too close. We shone our flashlights into the darkness, but all we could see were shadows dancing between the trees. Panic set in as we realized we were surrounded. We grabbed whatever we could and made a run for it, but the path we had used to get to the campsite was blocked. The forest had become a maze, twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. It was as if the woods themselves were trying to trap us. We spent the rest of the night trying to find our way out, but no matter which direction we went, we always ended up back at the campsite. The growling continued, following us wherever we went, but we never saw what was making the sound. By the time the sun started to rise, we were exhausted, scared, and completely lost. The once peaceful forest had become a prison, and we were at its mercy. When we finally found our way back to the main road, we were a mess, bruised, battered, and shaken to our core. We didn't talk about what had happened, not really. What was there to say? We had gone into the woods looking for an adventure, and we had found something much darker. The memory of that night still lingers, a haunting reminder that some places are better left unexplored. There's something about old farmhouses that always intrigued me. History, stories hidden in the creaking floorboards and faded wallpaper, it all felt so full of character. So when my family and I moved into an old farmhouse in the countryside, I was thrilled. The house was big, with plenty of space for the kids to run around, and the land stretched out for acres. It was quiet, peaceful, far cry from the noise of the city. But from the moment we moved in, something felt off, like the house was holding on to secrets it didn't want to share. It started with small things, doors that wouldn't stay closed, lights flickering for no reason, and the constant feeling of being watched. At first, we brushed it off as the quirks of an old house. But as the days turned into weeks, the strange occurrences became harder to ignore. We'd hear footsteps in the hallways at night, even though everyone was in bed. Objects would go missing, only to turn up in places we'd never put them. Kids started having nightmares, waking up screaming about shadows in their rooms. One evening, as I was unpacking some old boxes in the attic, I found a dusty photo album tucked away in a corner. The pictures were black and white, faded with age, but they told a story of the family who had lived there before us. There were photos of children playing in the yard, couples standing in front of the house, smiling at the camera, but as I flipped through the pages, photos grew darker. Smiles faded, replaced by grim expressions, and the last few pictures showed the family standing in the yard at night, staring straight at the camera with hollow eyes. It sent a chill down my spine. That night, the noises in the house grew louder. Footsteps were no longer just in the hallway. They were in the rooms, moving closer and closer. The shadows that had once been confined to the corners now seemed to reach out, creeping across the walls. My wife and I tried to stay calm, but the fear was palpable. Kids were terrified, refusing to sleep in their own rooms. We all ended up huddled together in the living room, trying to convince ourselves it was just our imagination. Deep down, we knew something was wrong. The next day, I spoke to one of the neighbors, an elderly man who had lived in the area his whole life. When I mentioned the farmhouse, his expression changed. He told me the house had a history, but the family who had lived there before us disappeared without a trace. No one knew what happened to them. The locals believed the house was cursed. They said it was haunted by the spirits of the previous owners, trapped there by whatever force had taken them. I wanted to dismiss it as just a local legend, but after everything that had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was some truth to it. That night, the activity in the house reached a terrifying peak. Footsteps were everywhere, the shadows dancing across the walls like living creatures. The temperature in the house dropped, and we could see our breath in the air. Then came the voices, faint at first but growing louder, filling the house with whispers of anger and sorrow. It was as if the house itself was speaking to us, warning us to leave. We tried to get out, but the doors wouldn't open, no matter how hard we pulled. We were trapped, at the mercy of whatever was haunting the old farmhouse. In the end, it was the breaking of dawn that saved us. As the first light of day filtered through the windows, the house seemed to release its grip on us. The shadows retreated, footsteps faded, and the doors finally opened. We didn't waste any time. We packed up what we could and left that place behind. The house still stands, but we've never gone back. The memory of those nights haunts us, a chilling reminder that some places are better left in the past. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, a luxury cruise across the open ocean, complete with all the amenities you could dream of. The ship was massive, a floating city, everything from fine dining to pools and theaters. We boarded with high spirits, ready to leave all our worries behind on the mainland. The first few days were everything we hoped for. Endless sunshine, calm seas, and nothing to do but relax. But then, things started to change. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. Little things began to go wrong, and the atmosphere on the ship shifted from one of carefree indulgence to something much darker. It started with the disappearance of a passenger. The announcement came over the intercom. Someone hadn't been seen since the previous night. The crew assured us that they were searching the ship and that everything was under control. But as the hours passed with no sign of the missing person, a sense of unease settled over the passengers. Rumors began to spread, whispers of what might have happened. Some said the person had fallen overboard, others that they had simply gotten lost in the labyrinth of corridors. But no one knew for sure. As the days went on, more passengers began to disappear. Each time, the crew would downplay the situation, telling us that the ship was vast and that people were probably just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the excuses grew thinner, and the tension on board became palpable. People started locking their doors at night, refusing to leave their cabins unless absolutely necessary. The once bustling decks and dining rooms became eerily quiet, as if everyone was waiting for something terrible to happen. I started noticing strange things. Crew members who seemed to be watching us a little too closely, areas of the ship that were suddenly off limits, and the feeling that we were being herded, guided to certain parts of the ship, while others remained mysteriously closed off. The ocean, once so peaceful, now felt like a vast, endless prison, and the ship itself became a haunting maze of corridors that led nowhere. The luxury and comfort that had once been so appealing now felt like a trap. One night, I woke to the sound of soft footsteps outside my cabin door. I lay there, frozen, listening as they passed by, slow and deliberate. I wanted to get up, to see who it was, but something held me back. Fear, perhaps, or instinct. Footsteps continued down the hall, and then they stopped, followed by a soft click, like a door being unlocked. I never found out what happened that night. The next morning, another passenger was gone. By then, the ship was in full panic mode. The crew stopped making announcements, and the captain was nowhere to be found. The passengers banded together, trying to figure out what was happening, but no one had any answers. We were adrift in the middle of the ocean, no way to call for help, and no idea who we could trust. Every shadow, every sound became a potential threat. People started disappearing in broad daylight, vanishing from locked cabins, and the sense of dread grew unbearable. In the end, we discovered the truth. It was too late. The crew had been involved in something sinister, an operation to harvest passengers for black market purposes. The luxury cruise was a front, a lure to attract unsuspecting victims who would never be missed. By the time we realized what was happening, most of us were already trapped. The few of us who managed to escape did so by sheer luck, slipping away in the chaos that erupted when the passengers fought back. We were eventually rescued, but the memories of that cruise still haunt me. The ship is out there somewhere, still sailing the seas, still luring in new victims with promises of luxury and relaxation. If you ever find yourself tempted by the idea of a luxury cruise, think twice. The ocean is vast and deep, and not everything that happens out there makes it back to shore. I've always loved the idea of a cozy winter cabin, snow falling softly outside while a fire crackles in the hearth. So when I found myself stranded in the mountains during a blizzard, I wasn't too worried. The cabin I stumbled upon was small but sturdy, and I thought I'd lucked out, shelter from the storm. But as soon as I stepped inside, I knew something wasn't right. Air was too still, too cold, and there was a strange tension in the atmosphere, like the cabin was holding its breath. I told myself it was just the isolation, the howling wind outside making the place seem more eerie than it was. But deep down, I knew better. I wasn't alone in the cabin. There were others, strangers who had also sought refuge from the storm. We exchanged uneasy pleasantries, trying to make the best of the situation. The fire in the hearth was warm, the snow outside relentless, and we had no choice but to wait it out. But as the hours passed, the tension in the cabin grew thicker. We were stuck together, strangers in a small space, and it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Little things started to go wrong. Food went missing, supplies disappeared, and the sense of unease turned into something much darker. It wasn't just the storm outside that we had to worry about. One of us wasn't who they claimed to be. The realization dawned slowly, like a shadow creeping across the floor. Whispers in the night, secretive glances, and the growing sense that something was terribly wrong. The cabin, once a refuge, now felt like a prison. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows made us jump. Paranoia set in, and the cold outside seemed to seep into our bones, chilling us from the inside out. As the blizzard raged on, the situation inside the cabin grew more tense. Accusations flew, trust eroded, and the fear became palpable. We were trapped, not just by the snow, but by our own minds. The cabin seemed to close in on us, the walls pressing closer with each passing hour. And then, first of us went missing. It happened during the night without a sound. 1 minute they were there, bundled up in front of the fire. The next, their spot was empty. The door to the cabin slightly ajar, snow drifting in. Panic set in. We searched the cabin from top to bottom, but there was no sign of them. The storm outside was too fierce for anyone to have survived long in it, but the thought that they had simply vanished didn't sit well with any of us. We tried to stay calm, to convince ourselves that they had wandered off and would be back soon. But as the hours passed and the storm showed no signs of letting up, fear took hold. The cabin had become a nightmare, and none of us knew who to trust. Final night was the worst. The wind howled outside, the snow piling up against the windows, but inside it was deathly quiet. We huddled together, each of us watching the others, waiting for something, anything to happen. The fire was dying, cold creeping in, and the tension was unbearable. And then, just as the storm began to ease, we found the truth. One of us had been playing a deadly game, manipulating us, feeding off our fear. They had taken the missing person, left them out in the storm to freeze, and now they were coming for the rest of us. In the end, it was survival instinct that saved me. I fled into the storm, the cold biting at my skin, but it was better than staying in that cabin with a killer. Somehow, I made it through the night, stumbling upon a rescue team just as I thought I couldn't go any further. The cabin is still out there, buried under snow, a silent witness to the horrors that took place inside. I've never told anyone the full story, and I don't think I ever will. The memories are too haunting, too chilling to relive. We were all looking forward to a relaxing family vacation. The brochure had promised a beautiful, quiet resort, nestled away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. When we arrived, the place looked perfect. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze, ocean lapped at the shore, and the resort itself was a picture of tranquility. But as we checked in, I couldn't help but notice something odd. The resort was deserted. There were no other guests, no staff beyond the front desk clerk, and the silence was almost oppressive. It was eerie to say the least, but we brushed it off. Maybe we'd just arrived during the off-season. The first day was peaceful enough. We explored the grounds, swam in the pool, and soaked up the sun. But as evening fell, the emptiness of the place began to weigh on us. The resort, once so inviting, now felt ominous. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows, and the wind howled through the empty hallways like a lost soul. The kids noticed it too. They asked where everyone was, why the resort felt so lonely. We didn't have an answer for them. We just tried to focus on making the best of it. The unease was hard to shake. That night, we heard the first noise. A loud bang echoed through the resort, startling us awake. We rushed out of our rooms, but there was nothing. No sign of what had caused the noise, just the oppressive silence that followed. The front desk was empty, the lights in the lobby dim. It felt like the resort was holding its breath, waiting for something. We decided to go back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The resort was too quiet, too still, and every creak, every rustle made our hearts race. The next day, things took a turn for the worse. We found strange symbols etched into the walls, symbols that hadn't been there the day before. They were crude, almost primitive, and they sent chills down my spine. We tried to ignore them, but the atmosphere had shifted. The resort no longer felt like a vacation spot, felt like a trap. The kids were scared, and so were we. We tried to leave, but the roads were blocked by fallen trees, the phones dead. We were trapped, cut off from the outside world, with no way to call for help. As the day wore on, the sense of dread grew stronger. We started hearing footsteps, faint and distant, but always there. We would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of our eyes, shadows darting between the trees, figures standing just out of sight. The resort, once so picturesque, had become a nightmare. The emptiness that had seemed peaceful now felt sinister, like the resort itself was watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. That night, the noises returned, louder this time. We barricaded ourselves in our rooms, but it didn't help. The banging, the scratching, the whispers, they surrounded us, coming from every direction. Kids were terrified, and we didn't know what to do. We were trapped in a place that had turned against us, with no way out. The resort had become a prison, and the fear was suffocating. In the early hours of the morning, we decided to make a break for it. We gathered what we could and headed for the beach, hoping to find a boat or some way off the island. But when we reached the shore, the ocean was calm, the resort a silent silhouette against the night sky. We looked back one last time, and in the distance, we saw them. Figures standing on the balcony, watching us. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, their presence haunting and chilling. We finally found a way off the island, but the memories of that resort still haunt us. It's out there, somewhere, waiting for its next unsuspecting guest. If you ever find yourself tempted by the promise of a deserted paradise, think twice. You might not be as alone as you think. We were just a group of college friends on a road trip, looking for adventure and a break from our studies. The plan was simple: hit the open road, explore new places, and make some memories along the way. Everything was going smoothly until we decided to take a detour. It wasn't on our original route, but someone had heard about a small town with great food, so we figured, why not? That's when things started to go wrong. The GPS led us down a narrow, winding road that seemed to go on forever, with no sign of civilization in sight. The further we drove, the more the landscape changed. The trees grew thicker, the sky darker, and the air heavier, almost suffocating. The excitement that had filled the car just hours before turned to unease as the road narrowed and the town remained elusive. Finally, we saw a sign, a weathered, faded sign that read, "Welcome to Stillwater." The town itself seemed stuck in time, with old, crumbling buildings and streets that looked like they hadn't seen life in years. But we were hungry and tired, so we decided to stop. At first, the town seemed deserted. There were no cars, no people, just an eerie silence that hung in the air. We found a diner, its neon sign flickering in the dim light, and decided to go in. The place was empty, save for an old man behind the counter who eyed us suspiciously. We ordered food, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that something was off. But as we sat there, eating in silence, we noticed the way the old man watched us, his eyes never leaving us, as if he knew something we didn't. When we asked about the town, he just shook his head and muttered something under his breath. The unease turned to fear when we realized that everyone we met seemed to know who we were. They greeted us by name, asked about things they shouldn't have known. It felt like we had walked into a trap, and the further we tried to push for answers, the more elusive they became. The town, once seemingly ordinary, now felt sinister, like it was hiding something dark beneath its surface. We decided to leave, but when we got back to the car, it wouldn't start. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped in Stillwater, with no way out and no one we could trust. The townspeople started appearing, one by one, standing silently on the streets, watching us. Their faces were blank, emotionless, but there was something in their eyes that sent chills down my spine. It was as if they were waiting for something we couldn't understand. Desperate, we tried to find another way out, but every road led us back to the town square. The streets twisted and turned in ways that made no sense, like the town itself was playing with us. The once friendly faces now seemed malevolent, and we could feel their eyes on us wherever we went. The sense of dread was suffocating, and we knew we had to find a way out before it was too late. That night, we barricaded ourselves in the motel we'd found. The fear didn't leave us. The townspeople were outside, standing silently in the dark, just watching. We could hear them whispering, their voices carrying on the wind. The words were too faint to understand. The night dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. And by morning, we were ready to do whatever it took to escape. In the end, we found a way out, an old dirt road that wasn't on any map. We didn't care where it led, as long as it took us far away from Stillwater. As we drove away, we didn't look back, but I could still feel their eyes on us, still hear their whispers. We never spoke about what happened in that town, but the memory lingers, haunting and chilling. If you ever find yourself tempted to take a detour, be careful. Some places aren't meant to be found. The lake house seemed like the perfect summer retreat, quiet, secluded, and right on the water. My friends and I had rented it for the season, eager to escape the city and enjoy some peace and relaxation. The house was old, with a rustic charm, made it feel like a step back in time. The lake itself was calm, its surface reflecting the sky like a mirror. Everything seemed idyllic, but from the moment we arrived, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was a subtle unease, like the house was watching us, waiting for something. The first few days were uneventful, filled with swimming, barbecues, and late-night conversations by the fire. But as we settled in, strange things started happening. It began with small incidents, lights flickering, doors creaking open on their own, and the occasional cold draft that seemed to come from nowhere. We laughed it off, chalking it up to the quirks of an old house. But then, we found the basement. The door had been locked when we arrived, but one night, we heard a loud thud from below, and when we checked, the door was wide open. Curiosity got the better of us, and we ventured down into the basement. It was damp and musty, filled with old furniture and forgotten belongings. But in the far corner, hidden beneath a dusty tarp, we found something that sent chills down our spines. A journal, its pages yellowed with age. The entries were frantic, detailing the life of the previous owner and the strange occurrences that had plagued the house. They spoke of whispers in the night, shadowy figures at the edge of the lake, and an overwhelming sense of dread that grew stronger with each passing day. As we read further, the entries grew darker, more desperate. The last few pages were barely legible, the handwriting shaky and erratic. Final entries spoke of a presence in the house, something ancient and malevolent that had driven the owner to madness. It ended abruptly, with a warning: "Do not stay. It wants you too." The words sent a chill through us, but we tried to brush it off. It was just a story, right? Deep down, we knew better. That night, the atmosphere in the house changed. The air grew thick with tension, and the once comforting sounds of the lake became eerie and haunting. We could hear whispers now, faint but unmistakable, drifting through the rooms like a ghostly wind. Shadows seemed to move on their own, stretching and twisting in unnatural ways. The house, once a place of refuge, now felt like a trap. We tried to stay calm. The fear was palpable. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and growing paranoia. The strange occurrences intensified. Objects moved on their own, and we began seeing figures at the edge of the lake, just standing there, watching. No matter how hard we tried to rationalize it, the evidence was impossible to ignore. The house was haunted, and whatever was there didn't want us to leave. Tension between us grew, and we found ourselves snapping at each other, our nerves frayed by the constant fear. In the end, it was the basement that broke us. One night, we heard a loud crash from below, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. When we went to investigate, we found the basement in disarray, as if someone, or something, had torn through it in a rage. The journal lay open on the floor, its pages fluttering as if caught in a breeze. That was the final straw. We packed our things and left that night, not daring to look back. The lake house still stands, but we've never gone back. The memories of that summer haunt us, a chilling reminder that some places are better left undisturbed. If you ever find yourself tempted by the allure of a quiet lake house, be careful. Past has a way of lingering, and not all stories have a happy ending. The idea of a wellness retreat deep in the woods sounded perfect. A chance to disconnect, unwind, and focus on ourselves. What could go wrong? The retreat center was nestled in the heart of a dense forest, miles away from any distractions. The air was fresh, the surroundings peaceful, and the atmosphere promised healing and rejuvenation. We arrived with high hopes, eager to leave our stresses behind. But as soon as we stepped out of the car, I felt a strange unease. The forest was too quiet, a silence almost unnatural, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. First day went smoothly enough. Yoga sessions, meditation, and healthy meals. But as night fell, the mood shifted. The other participants seemed on edge, whispering amongst themselves, casting nervous glances at the trees surrounding the retreat center. I'd overheard someone mention strange noises in the night, but I brushed it off as nerves. After all, we were in the middle of the woods. Of course, there would be unfamiliar sound. When I lay in bed that night, I couldn't sleep. The silence outside was oppressive, and every creak of the wooden cabin made my heart race. The next morning, one of the participants was missing. The retreat organizers told us not to worry, that they had probably gone for an early morning walk. But as the day wore on and there was still no sign of them, tension in the group grew. The organizers seemed nervous, their reassurances increasingly hollow. We tried to continue with the retreat activities, but the unease was impossible to ignore. It felt like the forest was closing in on us, trees pressing closer, suffocating us with their silent presence. By the second night, we were all on edge. The sounds outside had grown louder, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and the occasional low guttural noise that sent shivers down our spines. We huddled together in the main lodge, trying to convince ourselves that it was just animals, nothing more. But deep down, we knew something was wrong. The forest, once a place of tranquility, now felt like a predator, watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. The following morning, 2 more participants were gone. Panic set in, and the retreat organizers could no longer hide their fear. They admitted that this wasn't the first time people had gone missing at the retreat, but they had always managed to cover it up. We demanded answers, but all they could offer were vague explanations about the forest being unpredictable. It was clear they were hiding something, but we were too scared to press further. We just wanted to leave. We decided to leave that afternoon, but the forest had other plans. As we tried to make our way back to the main road, the path seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. It was as if the forest itself was trying to keep us there. Trees loomed over us, their branches clawing at the sky, and the noises grew louder, more menacing. We were lost, disoriented, and the sense of dread was suffocating. Felt like we were being hunted. By nightfall, we were completely lost. The retreat center was nowhere in sight, and the forest had become a maze of darkness and fear. We tried to stick together, but the panic was overwhelming. The sounds in the woods grew closer, more deliberate, and we could see shadows moving between the trees. Whatever was out there wasn't an animal. It was something far worse. We were being stalked, and there was no escape. In the end, only a few of us made it out. We stumbled upon a small cabin, occupied by a local who had heard the screams and came to investigate. He led us back to the road, but the memories of that retreat still haunt us. Forest is still out there, and so is whatever lurks within it. If you ever consider a wellness retreat deep in the woods, think twice. The peace and quiet might not be as harmless as they seem. The next few days were a nightmare. The noises grew louder, more frequent, and we started finding more signs of an intruder. Food gone missing, tools misplaced, and strange symbols scratched into the walls. We tried to barricade ourselves in the main room, but it didn't help. The footsteps continued, and the sense of dread was overwhelming. It felt like the bunker was playing tricks on us, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. We couldn't find a way out, and the walls seemed to close in, trapping us in a nightmare we couldn't escape. In the end, it was desperation that saved us. We broke through one of the ventilation shafts, crawling through the narrow, suffocating space until we emerged into the open air. We left everything behind, scrambling down the mountain with nothing but the clothes on our backs. The bunker still stands, dark and empty shell, but I know better than to go back. Whatever was in there with us, it's still there, waiting for its next victims. If you ever consider retreating to a bunker, be careful. Safety might not be what you find. For years, we'd prepared for the worst, stockpiling food, water, and supplies in our underground bunker, nestled in the mountains. It was our safe haven, a place where we could retreat if the world ever went south. And when the news broke that a catastrophic event was imminent, we didn't hesitate. We packed up everything we could and headed for the bunker, leaving the chaos of the world behind. It was supposed to be a place of safety, a fortress that would keep us alive no matter what. But as soon as the heavy door slammed shut behind us, sealing us in, I realized we might have made a terrible mistake. At first, everything seemed fine. The bunker was well equipped, with enough supplies to last us months, maybe even years. The air filtration system hummed quietly, and the reinforced walls made us feel invincible. But as the days turned into weeks, a strange tension began to settle over us. The isolation, the claustrophobia, started to get to us. The walls seemed to close in, the air grew thicker, and every little sound echoed through the bunker like a gunshot. We told ourselves it was just cabin fever, that we were safe down here. Deep down, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't long before we started hearing noises, faint, almost imperceptible at first. A distant clanging like metal on metal, or a soft scraping sound coming from the ventilation shaft. We tried to ignore it, convincing ourselves it was just the machinery, but the sounds grew louder, more persistent. It felt like the bunker itself was alive, like something, or someone, was trying to get in. We searched every inch of the place, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Yet the noises continued, gnawing at our nerves, making it impossible to sleep. Then, one night, power went out. The bunker was plunged into darkness, and for a moment all we could hear was our own breathing. But then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably human. They echoed through the bunker, coming from somewhere deep within the walls. We were terrified, huddled together in the pitch black, listening as the footsteps grew closer. We knew we were the only ones down here, or at least we thought we were. But those footsteps, they weren't ours. In a panic, we scrambled to restore the power, and when the lights flickered back on, we realized something horrifying. The door to the storage room was open, even though we'd locked it tight the night before. Supplies were missing, and there were muddy footprints on the floor. Someone had been in the bunker with us, and we had no idea how they'd gotten in or where they were now. The realization sent a wave of fear through us, and from that moment on, we knew we weren't alone. A luxury villa in the mountains, it sounded like the perfect getaway for our group of friends. The place was stunning, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of the surrounding peaks, a hot tub on the deck, and all the amenities we could ask for. We arrived full of excitement, ready to relax and enjoy the solitude. The villa was remote, far from the nearest town, and the isolation was exactly what we needed. But as the days passed, the isolation began to feel less like a blessing and more like a curse. There was something about the place that didn't sit right, something that lurked just beyond the edge of our awareness. It started with the dreams, vivid, unsettling nightmares that left us shaken when we woke up. We all had them, dreams of being watched, of something dark and malevolent lurking in the shadows. We tried to laugh it off, blaming it on the altitude, but the dreams didn't stop. In fact, they grew worse, more intense, until it felt like we weren't just dreaming, but experiencing something real, something terrifying. The villa, once a sanctuary, now felt oppressive, as if the walls were closing in on us. During the day, we tried to keep busy, hiking, cooking, and lounging by the hot tub. But the sense of unease never left. Every now and then, we'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of our eyes, dark shapes slipping between the trees, figures standing just beyond the tree line. When we went to investigate, there was nothing there, but the feeling of being watched persisted. The villa's remote location, once a draw, now felt like a trap. We were completely cut off from the world, and whatever was out there knew it. One evening, we decided to explore the surrounding area. We found an old path that led deeper into the woods, away from the villa. As we walked, the trees grew thicker, the light dimmer, until we stumbled upon something unexpected, a clearing with a small, ancient-looking shrine. The air around it was thick with tension, and as we approached, we felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The shrine was covered in strange symbols, symbols that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. We didn't stay long. Something about the place filled us with dread, and we hurried back to the villa, our nerves frayed. That night, the villa came alive with noises. Doors creaked open and shut on their own, footsteps echoed through the halls, and whispers filled the air, too faint to understand but too persistent to ignore. We huddled together in the living room, trying to make sense of what was happening. There were no answers, only fear. The villa, once a place of comfort, had turned against us. The presence we'd felt in our dreams in the woods was now inside the house, and it wasn't going to let us go. The final night was the worst. The noises grew louder, more aggressive, and the shadows seemed to take on a life of their own. We could feel the presence in the room with us, cold and malevolent, watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. We tried to leave, but the doors wouldn't open, the windows were sealed shut, and the villa became a prison. The terror was suffocating, and we knew we had to find a way out before it was too late. In the end, we escaped through a broken window, cutting ourselves on the glass, but not caring. We ran through the woods, not stopping until we reached the road. The villa loomed behind us, dark and silent, but we could still feel its presence, still hear the whispers in the back of our minds. We never went back, and we've never spoken about what happened. The villa still stands, beautiful trap waiting for its next guests. If you ever find yourself tempted by the allure of a secluded villa, be careful. Isolation isn't always what it seems. Urban exploration had always fascinated me, so when I heard about a hidden underground house in the desert, I knew I had to check it out. It was supposed to be one of those secret spots that few people knew about. A house built deep underground, out of sight and out of mind. I convinced a few friends to come along, and we set off, eager for the adventure. The directions were vague, but eventually we found it. A small, unassuming entrance built into the side of a rocky hill, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. The thrill of discovery pulsed through us as we descended into the darkness. The house was a maze of narrow hallways and low ceilings, the air thick and musty. It felt more like a bunker than a home, and as we explored, a sense of unease began to creep in. The rooms were sparsely furnished with old decaying furniture and strange symbols carved into the walls. It was clear that whoever had lived here had left in a hurry, but why? We tried to keep the mood light, joking about how it felt like we were in a horror movie, but the jokes fell flat. The place had an energy to it, something dark and oppressive that clung to us like a second skin. As we ventured deeper into the house, the layout became more confusing. Always twisted and turned in ways that didn't make sense, and we started to feel like we were walking in circles. The air grew colder, the silence more suffocating. And then we heard it, faint, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere below us. It was too deliberate to be the wind, too constant to be our imagination. We froze, listening, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. But as we moved closer, it seemed to move further away, always just out of reach. That's when we found the basement. The stairs were steep and narrow, leading down into a pitch-black abyss. The tapping grew louder as we descended, echoing through the darkness. We should have turned back, but curiosity, or maybe arrogance, pushed us forward. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, and the walls were lined with strange rusted pipes that hummed with a low, ominous vibration. The tapping was louder now, coming from a door at the far end of the room. A heavy metal door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. We hesitated, but eventually, one of us worked up the courage to push the door open. Inside was a small, windowless room lit only by the faint glow of our flashlights. The source of the tapping was immediately apparent. A large metal drum sitting in the center of the room, its lid slightly ajar. The noise echoed from within, rhythmic and unrelenting. We approached cautiously, hearts pounding in our chests. One of us reached out to lift the lid. But before they could, the drum rattled violently, as if something inside was trying to escape. Panic set in. We stumbled back, our flashlights swinging wildly as the drum continued to shake. The tapping had turned into a frantic pounding, and the air in the room felt thick and heavy, pressing down on us from all sides. We turned and ran, sprinting up the stairs and back through the twisting hallways, desperate to escape. The house seemed to shift around us, the layout changing as we fled, trapping us in its labyrinthine corridors. The walls closed in, the tapping echoing in our minds even as we left it behind. When we finally emerged into the harsh desert sunlight, we didn't stop running until we reached our car. The silence outside was a stark contrast to the chaos we had just escaped, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us. The underground house wasn't done with us yet. We never spoke about what we found down there, but the memories still haunt us, a chilling reminder that some places are hidden for a reason. If you ever find yourself tempted to explore the unknown, think twice. Not all secrets are meant to be uncovered. As a forest ranger, I've seen my fair share of strange things out in the woods, but nothing prepared me for what I stumbled upon in that remote section of the preserve. It was supposed to be a routine patrol, just another day making sure the trails were clear and the wildlife was safe. Forest Preserve was vast, stretching for miles in every direction, and most of it was untouched, wild, and rarely visited. That day, I decided to take a path I hadn't checked in a while. A narrow trail that wound deep into the heart of the forest. Further I went, the quieter it became, until the only sounds were the rustling leaves and the distant calls of birds. I was about halfway through my patrol when I noticed something odd. A section of the trail that had been deliberately blocked. Someone had piled branches and debris across the path, creating a crude barrier. It wasn't the work of animals, that much was clear. My curiosity piqued. I cleared the obstruction and continued on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Air grew colder, the trees denser, and the usual sounds of the forest seemed to fade away, replaced by an eerie silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. As I pushed further into the forest, I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. An illegal operation, hidden deep in the woods, far from any prying eyes. It was a makeshift camp, with tents, equipment, and a large pit that reeked of chemicals. The whole setup was disturbing. But what really unnerved me were the people. They were rough-looking, their eyes cold and hard, and they clearly weren't happy to see me. The moment they spotted me, I knew I was in trouble. These weren't just poachers or illegal loggers. There was something far more dangerous going on here. I tried to act casual, like I was just passing through, but it was too late. One of them approached, a man with a scar running down the side of his face. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with a look that made my blood run cold. I knew I had to get out of there, but turning my back on them didn't seem like a good idea either. Slowly, I backed away, making excuses about needing to check another trail. They didn't move. They just watched me, their expressions unreadable, and I could feel their eyes on me long after I had left the camp behind. As soon as I was out of sight, I radioed for backup. The signal was weak, and my call for help crackled into static. That's when I heard it. Branch snapping, far too close for comfort. I spun around, but there was no one there, just the thick forest pressing in on all sides. I started walking faster, my heart pounding in my chest. Every rustle, every movement in the trees felt like a threat, and I knew those men wouldn't just let me leave. They had something to hide, and they weren't going to risk me exposing it. The rest of the hike back to my truck was a blur of fear and adrenaline. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, feel a hand on my shoulder, but the forest remained eerily quiet. When I finally reached the safety of my vehicle, I didn't waste any time. I drove straight to the nearest ranger station, my mind racing with what I had seen. The authorities were notified and an investigation was launched, but by the time they arrived, the camp was gone, leaving only traces of what had been there. To this day, I don't know exactly what I stumbled upon in that forest, but I've heard rumors, stories of people who've gone missing in those woods, of strange activities that no one can explain. The preserve is still there, wild and untouched. I avoid that section now. Some secrets are better left undiscovered, and some trails are better left untraveled. If you ever find yourself deep in the woods, far from help, be careful. You never know what or who might be watching. It was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, beach house all to myself, a place to get away from it all and find some solitude. The house was small but cozy, perched right on the edge of the shoreline, with nothing but sand and sea stretching out before me. The rental agency had assured me that it was the perfect place for someone looking to unwind, and at first, it seemed like they were right. The days were quiet, the ocean lulling me into a sense of calm, and the isolation was exactly what I needed. But it didn't take long for the loneliness to turn into something more sinister. It started with the neighbor. He lived a few houses down, the only other person I'd seen since I arrived. At first, he seemed friendly enough, waving when we crossed paths on the beach, making small talk about the weather, but there was something off about him, something that made me uneasy. His eyes lingered too long, his questions a little too personal. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. The feeling of unease wouldn't go away. Every time I saw him, it felt like he was watching me, studying me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more about me than he should. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my window. They were slow, deliberate, as if someone was pacing back and forth, just inches away from where I slept. I held my breath, listening, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps continued for what felt like an eternity before finally fading away. When I worked up the courage to look outside, there was no one there, just the empty beach and the sound of the waves. But the footprints in the sand told a different story. They led from the water's edge to my window, and then back again, disappearing into the darkness. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was just a dream, a trick of the wind and the waves. But as I went about my day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The beach, once so peaceful, now felt ominous, as if it was hiding something. I kept catching glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows that disappeared the moment I turned to look, figures standing just beyond the reach of the tide. And then, there was the neighbor. He seemed to be everywhere. Always just a little too close, always watching. That night, the footsteps returned. This time, they were closer, louder, accompanied by the sound of something scraping against the wall. I tried to ignore it, pulling the covers over my head like a child hiding from a nightmare. But the sound was relentless, growing louder and more insistent until I couldn't take it anymore. I threw open the curtains, expecting to see the neighbor standing there, but again, there was no one. The beach was empty, the night silent, but the footprints in the sand were fresh, leading straight to my door. I knew I had to leave. The beach house, once a sanctuary, had become a prison, and the sense of dread was suffocating. But when I tried to pack up and go, I found my car wouldn't start. The engine sputtered and died, no matter how many times I turned the key. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped, cut off from the world, with no way to call for help. The neighbor appeared again, standing on the beach, watching me struggle. He didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there with that same unsettling smile on his face. In the end, I fled on foot, running down the beach until I found a road that led back to town. I never looked back, and I never returned to that beach house. The memories of those nights still haunt me. Chilling reminder that solitude can be dangerous, and that some places, no matter how beautiful, are best left behind. If you ever find yourself tempted by the idea of a lonely beach house, think twice. You might not be as alone as you think. The road trip was supposed to be a fun escape, chance for me and my friends to explore the countryside and find some hidden gems along the way. But somewhere along the route, we got lost. The GPS took us down a winding road that seemed to lead nowhere, and before we knew it, we were deep in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense trees and nothing but the sound of the wind in the leaves. Just when we thought we'd have to turn back, we spotted it. An old, abandoned church at the end of a dirt path, half hidden by the overgrown brush. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Paint peeling, the windows shattered, but there was something about it that drew us in. We were curious, as most people would be. Who wouldn't want to explore an old, forgotten place like that? We parked the car and made our way inside, the wooden doors creaking ominously as we pushed them open. The air inside was thick with dust and decay, the pews rotting and the altar covered in cobwebs. But despite the disrepair, the church felt heavy with a presence, as if the spirits of those who had once worshipped there had never truly left. We joked about it at first, snapping pictures and daring each other explore the darker corners. The further in we went, the less we laughed. It was when we found the old confessional that things took a turn. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, we found a strange collection of objects. Old, tattered clothing, rusted chains, and what looked like ritualistic symbols carved into the wood. There were candles, long since burned out, and a worn Bible with pages torn and missing. It was disturbing, to say the least, but what really sent chills down our spines was the note we found wedged in the corner. It was scribbled in frantic handwriting, barely legible, but the message was clear. You can't leave. It won't let you. We laughed nervously, trying to brush it off as someone's idea of a joke, but the fear had already taken root. The church, once just an old building, now felt alive with a dark energy. The air grew colder, and we started hearing things. Faint whispers, footsteps in the empty aisles, creaking of the old wood as if someone was moving through the church, watching us. We decided it was time to leave, but as we turned to go, we realized we weren't alone. The caretaker appeared out of nowhere, a gaunt figure dressed in black, with eyes that seemed to pierce through the dim light. Claimed to be the keeper of the church, insisting that we had no right to be there. His voice was soft, almost too calm, but there was an edge to it that made our skin crawl. He told us we were sinners, that we needed salvation, and that the church would offer it to us, whether we wanted it or not. We tried to laugh it off, to make excuses and leave, but he blocked the door, his eyes narrowing as he whispered, "It's already too late." Panic set in as we realized we were trapped. The church, once an adventure, had become a nightmare. Caretaker's presence was oppressive, and every shadow seemed to twist and shift with malevolent intent. We could hear the whispers growing louder, more insistent, as if the very walls of the church were speaking to us. Caretaker wouldn't let us leave, and the fear was suffocating. It felt like the church was alive, feeding off our terror, and we knew we had to escape before it consumed us. In the end, it was sheer desperation that saved us. We broke through a side door, running through the overgrown graveyard and not stopping until we reached the car. When we looked back, the church stood silent and still. Caretaker nowhere to be seen, but we could still feel it, the oppressive presence, the sense that something was watching us, waiting for us to return. We never spoke of what happened that day, and we never took that road again. The abandoned church is still there, dark relic of a forgotten past, and a chilling reminder that some places are best left alone. When we first moved to the suburbs, we thought we'd found our dream home. The neighborhood was picture perfect. Manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and a sense of safety that you just couldn't find in the city. The house itself was everything we'd ever wanted, with plenty of space for the kids and a backyard that seemed to go on forever. But as we settled in, we started to notice that things weren't quite as idyllic as they seemed. It was small stuff at first. A lingering glance from a neighbor, whispers that stopped the moment we walked by, and a general sense that everyone knew something we didn't. At first, we tried to fit in. We attended the neighborhood block parties, made small talk with the neighbors, and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling that something was off. But the more we tried to blend in, the more we realized that this wasn't a normal neighborhood. There were rules, unspoken but rigidly enforced. Everyone's lawn had to be perfectly maintained, the houses had to look a certain way, and the slightest deviation from the norm was met with disapproving stares and whispers. Felt like we were living in some kind of suburban nightmare, where everything looked perfect on the surface. Underneath, something dark was festering. The turning point came when we discovered the truth about the neighborhood. Late one night, we saw our next-door neighbor, someone who had always seemed friendly and welcoming, dragging something heavy out of his house and into his car. It was too dark to see exactly what it was, but the next morning, we noticed that his wife was gone. No one in the neighborhood mentioned her disappearance, and when we asked, they acted like she had never existed. The realization hit us like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a place where secrets were buried, and anyone who didn't conform disappeared. We tried to confront the neighbor, but he just smiled that unsettling smile and told us to mind our own business. The other neighbors began to avoid us, their once friendly faces now cold and distant. It felt like we were being watched, like every move we made was being scrutinized. The sense of dread grew stronger with each passing day, and we knew we had to get out. But leaving wasn't as easy as we thought. The real estate agent who had sold us the house refused to return our calls, and the paperwork we needed to sell the house had mysteriously disappeared. As the days went on, strange things started happening in the house. We'd hear footsteps in the hallways at night, see shadows moving out of the corner of our eyes, and find things in the house that we hadn't put there. Kids started having nightmares, waking up screaming about people standing at the foot of their beds. The atmosphere in the house grew darker, more oppressive, and it felt like the walls were closing in on us. We knew we weren't alone, that something or someone was in the house with us. The final straw came when we found a note slipped under our door. It was written in the same neat, controlled handwriting as the welcome note we'd received when we first moved in, but the message was chilling. "You can't leave. You belong here now." That night, we packed up what we could and fled, leaving everything else behind. As we drove away, I glanced back at the neighborhood one last time. The houses stood silent and still, but I could feel their eyes on us, watching, waiting for us to return. We never looked back, and we never told anyone what happened in that perfect suburban neighborhood. The memories of those days still haunt us. Chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying places aren't haunted houses or abandoned buildings. The seemingly perfect places where everyone's hiding a secret. If you ever find yourself in a neighborhood that seems too perfect, trust your instincts. There's always a price to pay for perfection. Hiking on a remote mountain trail had always been my idea of peace. The air was crisp, the scenery breathtaking, and the solitude a welcome escape from the chaos of daily life. It was supposed to be a simple day hike, nothing too strenuous, just a chance to clear my head. But as I climbed higher into the mountains, the trail grew more rugged, less traveled. The forest closed in around me, and soon I felt a strange unease creeping up my spine, like I wasn't alone in these woods, The first sign that something was wrong came when I stumbled upon a deserted cabin, half hidden by overgrown brush. It looked ancient, with its roof sagging and the windows shattered, yet there was something disturbingly fresh about the scene. The door was ajar, swaying gently in the breeze, and inside, the remnants of a campfire still smoldered. I called out, but there was no answer, just the eerie silence of the forest pressing in on all sides. The sense of being watched grew stronger, making my skin prickle. I tried to shake off the unease and continue up the trail. The forest had other plans. The path twisted and turned, becoming a confusing labyrinth of trees and shadows. Every step felt like it was taking me deeper into a trap, and I started noticing strange relics scattered along the way. Old tools, rusted beyond recognition, and what looked like animal bones. Each discovery felt more ominous than the last, as if the mountain itself was warning me to turn back. Stubbornness and curiosity pushed me forward. Nightfall came quicker than I anticipated, and with it, a thick fog that seemed to rise from the ground itself. I tried to set up camp, but the oppressive silence made it impossible to relax. The only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves, though I could swear I heard footsteps just beyond the tree line. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was plagued by nightmares, visions of the cabin, of twisted figures watching me from the darkness. When I awoke, the fog had thickened, and my sense of direction was gone. Desperation set in as I realized I was hopelessly lost. The trail, once so clear, had vanished, replaced by a sea of mist and trees that all looked the same. I stumbled through the forest, calling out for help. My voice seemed to vanish into the fog, swallowed by the oppressive silence. And then I saw them, figures moving in the mist, just out of reach. They were silent, their forms barely distinguishable, but I could feel their eyes on me, tracking my every move. Panic gripped me, and I ran, but no matter how fast I went, the figures always seemed to be just behind me. Hours passed, or maybe it was days, it was impossible to tell. Fog never lifted, and the figures never left. I was exhausted, hungry, and terrified, and every step felt like it was leading me further from safety. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I stumbled upon another cabin, this one more intact than the first. The door was open, and inside, I found a small table with a map of the mountain laid out on it. But something was wrong. The map was marked with dozens of tiny red X's, all clustered around the area where I had been hiking. I realized with horror that the X's marked the locations of other hikers who had gone missing on the mountain. The map wasn't a guide, it was a warning, and then I saw it. Fresh X, right where I was standing. The realization that I was being hunted, just like the others, sent a wave of terror through me. I turned to leave. The door slammed shut behind me, and the figures were there, waiting in the shadows. I was trapped, just like the others, and there was no escape. In the end, the mountain took me, just as it had taken so many before. The trail that had once promised peace and solitude became my prison, and the figures that haunted me were my only company. My story ends here, lost in the fog, with no hope of rescue. If you ever find yourself on a remote mountain trail, beware. The mountain has secrets, and it doesn't like to let them go. The quaint countryside bed and breakfast seemed like the perfect weekend escape. It was tucked away in a quiet village, surrounded by rolling hills and endless fields. The owners, an elderly couple, greeted us warmly when we arrived, their smiles genuine, their hospitality unmatched. The house itself was charming, with creaky wooden floors and a cozy fireplace that crackled in the evening. Everything about the place felt like a step back in time, peaceful and serene. But as the first night wore on, I started to notice that something wasn't quite right. It began with the odd looks from the other guests. Furtive glances seemed to follow us wherever we went. At breakfast, they barely spoke, their eyes darting between us and the elderly couple who served the food with an unsettling smile. There was a tension in the air, something unspoken but deeply felt. We tried to brush it off, telling ourselves that the guests were just shy or that we were reading too much into things. But the feeling of unease grew stronger with each passing hour, and soon it became impossible to ignore. The next day, we decided to explore the village. It was picturesque, cobblestone streets and old stone buildings that looked like they had been there for centuries. But there was something off about the place. Too quiet, too empty. The few villagers we encountered seemed distant, their faces devoid of expression. When we asked about the history of the village, they spoke in hushed tones, avoiding eye contact. It felt like we had stumbled into a place that time had forgotten, a place where secrets were buried deep. That evening, we returned to the B&B, hoping to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over us. But the atmosphere in the house had changed. The warmth that had greeted us upon arrival was gone, replaced by a cold, oppressive silence. The other guests had vanished, and the elderly couple seemed different, distant, almost sinister. They didn't speak as they served us dinner, their eyes never meeting ours. The food tasted strange. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. That night, the house came alive with sounds. We heard whispers in the hallways, footsteps on the stairs, and the creak of doors opening and closing. When I got up to investigate, I found the house empty. The lights dimmed and the shadows long and dark. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and every step I took felt like it was leading me deeper into a trap. When I returned to our room, I found a note slipped under the door. It was written in a shaky hand, the words barely legible. "Leave before it's too late." Panic set in as I realized we needed to get out of there. We packed our bags in a hurry. When we tried to leave, we found the front door locked from the outside. The elderly couple appeared out of nowhere, their smiles gone, placed by cold, calculating expressions. They told us we couldn't leave. We had been chosen. The words sent chills down my spine, and I knew we were in danger. We tried to escape through a window, but the house seemed to twist and turn, the exits disappearing before our eyes. The final hours in the B&B were a blur of terror and confusion. The house seemed to come alive, its walls closing in on us, trapping us in a maze of endless corridors. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the shadows seemed to reach out, trying to pull us in. The elderly couple followed us wherever we went, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. We knew we had to get out, but every path we took led us back to the same place. Dining room, where the table was set for us, waiting. In the end, we found a way out through the cellar, breaking down a door that led into the woods behind the house. We ran for what felt like miles, never looking back, till we reached the safety of the village. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, the B&B was nowhere to be seen, as if it had never existed. But the memories of that night still haunt us, a chilling reminder that some places are better left unexplored. If you ever find yourself tempted by the charm of a countryside B&B, think twice. You might not be as welcome as you think. We were thrill seekers, always looking for the next adventure. So when we heard about a ghost town deep in the desert, we couldn't resist. The place was rumored to be abandoned for decades, left to decay in the unforgiving sun, with nothing but empty buildings and the whispers of the past. The drive out there was long and treacherous, the landscape barren and endless. When we finally arrived, the town loomed before us, silent and still, like a relic from another time. The buildings were crumbling, their windows shattered. There was something oddly inviting about the place, something that made us want to explore. We wandered through the streets, marveling at the way time had seemingly stood still. There were old storefronts with faded signs, a schoolhouse with broken desks, and a saloon with dusty bottles still sitting on the bar. It felt like the town had been frozen in time, as if the people had just up and left one day, never to return. But as we explored further, a sense of unease began to settle over us. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it faint, haunting echoes that sounded like distant voices. It was as if the town itself was alive, watching us with unseen eyes. The deeper we ventured into the ghost town, the more unsettling it became. We found old photographs scattered across the floor of a house, images of families long gone, their faces blurred and distorted by time. In the church, we discovered rows of empty pews, each one covered in a thick layer of dust, as if no one had set foot inside for years. But the most disturbing find was in the town's jail. A set of rusty keys hanging from a hook, and a single cell with the door wide open. The air inside was cold, and we could feel the weight of something unseen pressing down on us. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the town, we realized we weren't alone. We started seeing movement out of the corner of our eyes, figures slipping between the buildings, watching us from the darkened windows. At first, we thought it was just our imagination, the result of too many ghost stories and too little sleep. But the figures became more distinct, their presence undeniable. They didn't speak, didn't approach, just watched us with eyes that seemed to glow in the fading light. The air grew thick with tension, and we knew we had to leave. But leaving wasn't as easy as we thought. The town seemed to shift around us, the streets twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. Every path we took led us back to the center of town, where the figures were waiting. They stood in a circle, silent and still, their eyes fixed on us. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped, with no way out and no one to help us. The ghost town had become a living nightmare, and we were its prisoners. We could hear whispers now, faint but unmistakable, as if the town itself was speaking to it. In a desperate attempt to escape, we ran to the edge of town, hoping to find the road we had come in on. But the landscape had changed, the desert stretching out in all directions with no sign of the road or our car. It was as if the town had swallowed us whole, cutting us off from the outside world. The figures followed us, always just out of reach, their presence suffocating. We could feel their eyes on us, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. The town wasn't just abandoned, it was alive, and it wanted us to stay. In the end, we found refuge in an old mine on the outskirts of town, huddling together in the darkness as the figures closed in. We could hear them outside, their footsteps echoing through the tunnels, but they never came any closer. It was as if they were waiting for something, biding their time. When the first light of dawn finally broke, the town was silent once more, the figures gone. We didn't waste any time. We ran, never looking back, and didn't stop until we were miles away. The ghost town is still out there, waiting for its next visitors. Secrets buried in the dust and shadows. Do you ever find yourself tempted to explore a place that time has forgotten? Be careful. Some towns are abandoned for a reason, and not all ghosts are friendly. The idea of camping on a secluded beach sounded perfect. Few days of sun, surf, and relaxation, away from the crowds and noise. We found the spot after hours of driving along winding coastal roads, finally reaching a stretch of sand that seemed untouched by time. The beach was flanked by rocky cliffs on either side, the ocean stretching out endlessly before us. It was paradise, or so we thought. We set up our tents, built a fire, and spent the day basking in the sun, feeling like we had the world to ourselves. But as night fell, the beach took on a different, more sinister feel. First sign that something was wrong came when we noticed the footprints. They weren't ours, and they led from the water's edge up to our campsite and then back down again. We hadn't seen anyone else on the beach all day, and the idea that someone had been watching us, unseen, sent a chill down our spines. We tried to laugh it off, telling ourselves it was just some local fisherman or a curious passerby. Deep down, we knew something wasn't right. The ocean, once so calming, now seemed ominous, its dark waves hiding secrets beneath the surface. That night, the wind picked up, howling through the cliffs and whipping the tents. The fire struggled to stay lit, casting flickering shadows that danced across the sand. We huddled closer together, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. Then, just as we were about to call it a night, we saw him, a figure emerging from the water, slowly making his way toward us. At first, we thought it was just a trick of the light, the moon casting strange reflections on the waves. But as he drew closer, it became clear that this was no illusion. The figure was tall and gaunt, his skin pale and slick with seawater. He moved with an unnatural grace, his eyes locked on us as he advanced up the beach. Panic set in, and we scrambled to our feet, backing away as he approached. But there was nowhere to go. Cliffs behind us were too steep to climb, and the ocean in front of us seemed to stretch on forever. We were trapped, and the figure knew it. He stopped just a few feet from our campfire, his eyes cold and empty, as if he were sizing us up. For what felt like an eternity, no one moved. The only sound was the crashing of the waves and the howling of the wind. Then, without warning, the figure turned and walked back into the ocean, disappearing beneath the waves as if he had never been there at all. We stood there in stunned silence, trying to make sense of what we had just seen. But there were no answers, only the lingering fear that he would return. We spent the rest of the night wide awake, listening to the sounds of the ocean, half expecting to see the figure emerge from the water again. The next morning, we found more footprints in the sand, leading from the water to our tents and then back down to the sea. We packed up and left as quickly as we could, not daring to stay another night on that cursed beach. As we drove away, I glanced back one last time, half expecting to see the figure standing at the water's edge, watching us go. But the beach was empty, the waves lapping peacefully against the shore, as if nothing had happened. Yet the memory of that night still haunts us, a chilling reminder that the ocean holds secrets we may never understand. You ever find yourself tempted to camp on a secluded beach? Think twice. The ocean is vast and mysterious, and not everything that comes from it is friendly. I thought a lakeside cabin would be the perfect place to heal. After everything I'd been through, the idea of solitude, surrounded by nature, seemed like exactly what I needed. The cabin was small and rustic, nestled at the edge of a crystal-clear lake, with nothing but trees and water as far as the eye could see. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, and for the first few days, I felt like I had found a sanctuary. But then, the feeling of being watched started to creep in, a presence that seemed to lurk just beneath the surface of the water. The first time I noticed it was while sitting on the dock, staring out at the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from below. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was still on edge from everything that had happened. But the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it grew stronger with each passing day. Every time I went near the water, I could feel it, eyes on me, following my every move. One evening, as the sun was setting, I noticed something strange. There were ripples on the lake. Even though there was no wind, they moved in a slow, deliberate pattern, like something was swimming just beneath the surface. I stared at the water, trying to make out what it was, but all I could see was darkness. The ripples grew closer to the dock, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I backed away, retreating to the safety of the cabin, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. If anything, it intensified. That night I was woken by a strange sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping on the window. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and listened. The tapping continued, slow and steady, like someone or something was outside, trying to get in. I crept to the window and peered through the curtains, but all I saw was darkness. The tapping stopped as soon as I looked, but I could feel the presence still there, just out of sight. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I found footprints by the lake. Bare, wet footprints leading from the water's edge up to the cabin and then back down again. They were too large to be mine, and I hadn't seen anyone else around. The sight of them sent a wave of fear through me, and I decided it was time to leave. But when I tried to pack up and go, I found that my car wouldn't start. The engine sputtered and died, no matter how many times I turned the key. I was stranded, alone, with whatever was watching me from the lake. Over the next few days, the presence grew more aggressive. I would hear whispers in the wind, faint and unintelligible, filled with malice. Shadows would move just out of the corner of my eye, and the tapping on the window returned every night, always stopping just as I looked. The lake, once so beautiful and serene, had become a nightmare, and I could feel it pulling me in, beckoning me closer to the water. It wanted me, and I was powerless to resist. Final night was the worst. Tapping was louder, more insistent, and I could see a figure standing at the water's edge, watching me. was tall and thin, its features obscured by the darkness, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and unrelenting. It moved closer, slowly, deliberately, until it was right outside the cabin. I could hear its breathing, shallow and rasping, as it tapped on the window, waiting for me to let it in. I knew I had to leave, but the fear was paralyzing. In the end, I ran, out of the cabin, through the trees, and away from the lake. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I finally looked back, the cabin was just a shadow in the distance, and the figure was gone. The memory of those days haunts me, a chilling reminder that some places are better left undisturbed. If you ever find yourself tempted by the idea of a quiet cabin by the lake, be careful. The water is deep, and it holds more than just fish. I should have known better than to check into that rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The neon sign flickered ominously, casting a sickly glow over the cracked pavement, and the whole place reeked of neglect. But it was late, and I was exhausted after hours of driving, so I ignored my instincts and went inside. The lobby was dimly lit, air thick with the smell of mildew and something else I couldn't quite place. The man behind the counter barely looked up as he handed me the key, muttering something under his breath that I couldn't understand. The unease settled in my stomach like a stone. I brushed it off. I just needed a place to sleep. The room was worse than I expected. Bed sagged in the middle. Wallpaper was peeling, and the carpet was stained with who knows what. But it was quiet, and I was too tired to care. I threw my bag on the floor and collapsed onto the bed. Determined, get some rest. Sleep didn't come easily. The silence of the room was oppressive, almost suffocating, and every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound from the hallway made my heart race. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. Then came the knocking. It started as a soft tap, barely audible, like someone lightly rapping on the door. I froze, listening intently, but it stopped just as quickly as it had started. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me, and tried to go back to sleep. But then it happened again, louder this time, more insistent. I sat up, staring at the door, half expecting someone to burst through it. But no one did. The hallway was silent, empty, as if nothing had happened. The unease grew stronger, and I knew I wouldn't be getting any sleep that night. As the hours dragged on, the knocking continued. Sometimes at the door, sometimes at the window, always just out of sight. I tried to ignore it, but the fear was palpable, wrapping around me like a vice. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something, or someone, was just outside, waiting for me to let my guard down. The motel, once just a shabby place to rest, had become a prison, and I was trapped inside with whatever was lurking in the shadows. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate, and far too close for comfort. They stopped right outside my door, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then came the scratching, a soft, rhythmic sound like nails dragging across wood. It sent chills down my spine, and I knew I had to get out of there. I grabbed my things, trying to be as quiet as possible, and crept to the door. But when I opened it, the hallway was empty. Air was thick with tension, and the only sound was the pounding of my own heart. I made my way to the lobby, hoping to check out and leave. The front desk was empty. The man who had checked me in was nowhere to be found, and the place was eerily silent. Desperation set in as I realized I was alone. I tried the front door, but it wouldn't budge, no matter how hard I pulled. It was as if the motel itself was holding me captive, refusing to let me leave. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched for another way out, but every door, every window was locked tight. Then I heard it. Voice. A low, rasping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It called my name, softly at first, but growing louder with each repetition. It was as if the walls themselves were speaking to me, beckoning me deeper into the motel's dark embrace. The fear was overwhelming, and I knew I had to escape before it was too late. I ran through the hallways, the voice following me, relentless and terrifying. In the end, I managed to find a side door that led to the parking lot, and I didn't stop running until I was back in my car. The motel loomed behind me, dark and silent, but I could still feel its presence, as if it were watching me leave. I didn't look back as I sped away, my heart still pounding in my chest. The memories of that night haunt me, a chilling reminder that some places are best left unexplored. If you ever find yourself tempted to stay in a cheap, rundown motel, think twice. You might check in, but you may never check out. As a wine enthusiast, visiting a remote vineyard in the countryside sounded like a dream come true. The vineyard was far from the beaten path, tucked away in a valley surrounded by rolling hills and endless rows of grapevine. The family that owned the place had a reputation for producing some of the finest wines in the region, and I couldn't wait to experience it for myself. The drive out there was long and winding, with the road growing narrower and more isolated as I went. When I finally arrived, the vineyard was everything I had hoped for. Beautiful, serene, and seemingly untouched by time. The family welcomed me with open arms, eager to show me around and share their passion for winemaking. The tour was fascinating, with the patriarch of the family explaining the process in great detail, from the careful cultivation of the vines to the meticulous aging of the wine. But as the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The family was friendly enough, but there was an underlying tension, a sense that they were hiding something. Their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes, and I caught them exchanging furtive glances when they thought I wasn't looking. That evening, they invited me to a private tasting in the cellar, a rare opportunity to sample some of their most exclusive wines. The cellar was cool and dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of oak barrels and aging wine. Patriarch poured me a glass of their finest vintage, his eyes gleaming with pride as I took a sip. The wine was exquisite, unlike anything I had ever tasted, but there was something else in the flavor, something I couldn't quite place. It was rich, almost too rich, with a lingering aftertaste that sent a shiver down my spine. As the night wore on, the family grew more insistent that I stay the night. They claimed it was too dangerous to drive back in the dark, that the roads were treacherous and easy to get lost on. Reluctantly, I agreed, and they showed me to a guest room in the old farmhouse. The room was quaint, with a heavy wooden bed and lace curtains, but the atmosphere was unsettling. The walls were adorned with old photographs of the family, their faces stern and unsmiling, and the air felt thick with secret. I couldn't sleep that night. The house was too quiet, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. I kept hearing faint noises, footsteps in the hallway, creak of floorboards, and the distant sound of something metallic clinking together. My unease grew as the hours dragged on, and I found myself unable to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the room. Then, just as I was drifting off, I heard a voice, a soft, desperate whisper that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was faint, barely audible, but I could make out the words, "Help me." Terrified, I got out of bed and followed the sound. It led me down a narrow staircase to the cellar, where the door was slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wine, but there was something else, a metallic tang that turned my stomach. I crept deeper into the cellar, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw it. Hidden behind a row of barrels was a small, dark room, its walls lined with chains and shackles. The floor was stained with something dark, and in the corner, I found a journal, its pages filled with the ramblings of someone driven to madness. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. Family's success, their special wine, it wasn't just about skill and craftsmanship. They had a twisted method of ensuring their wines remained the finest. The whispers in the night, the strange aftertaste in the wine, it all made sense now. I had to get out of there, but as I turned to leave, I heard the creak of the cellar door closing behind me. The family was there, their faces expressionless, their eyes cold. I was trapped. In the end, I escaped through a small window in the cellar, fleeing into the night with nothing but the clothes on my back. The vineyard loomed behind me, dark and silent, but I could still feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting for me to return. The memories of that night still haunt me, a chilling reminder that some traditions are best left undiscovered. If you ever find yourself tempted to visit a remote vineyard, be careful. You might get more than you bargained for. The final straw came when I stumbled upon the old caretaker's shack, hidden behind a cluster of overgrown trees. The door was ajar, creaking on its hinges, and inside I found what I had been dreading: a room filled with old photographs and news clippings, all documenting the tragic history of the park. But what terrified me the most were the recent photos, pictures of us, taken just hours before as we entered the park. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We weren't the first to come here, and we wouldn't be the last. Park had claimed others before us, and now it had us in its grasp. I ran, desperate to find the others and get out of there, but the park had become a maze of twisting paths and dead ends. The rides loomed out of the darkness like grotesque monsters, and the whispers in the wind became voices, taunting and mocking me. I could feel the presence of something old and malevolent, closing in on me. And then I saw them. Figures, lurking in the shadows, watching me with cold, unblinking eyes. They were the caretakers now, the ones who had come before, trapped in the park's endless cycle of horror. In the end, I barely escaped, stumbling out of the park just as the first light of dawn broke over the trees. The others were never found, and the memories of that night still haunt me. A chilling reminder that some places are abandoned for a reason. If you ever find yourself tempted to explore an old, forgotten amusement park, think twice. You might not like what you find. We'd heard the rumors for years. A forgotten amusement park, hidden deep in the woods, left to decay after some tragic accident no one wanted to talk about. The place was supposed to be haunted, cursed even, but that only made us more determined to find it. After all, who wouldn't want to explore a creepy, abandoned amusement park? It took us hours of hiking through overgrown trails and dense forest, but when we finally stumbled upon it, the sight was both eerie and mesmerizing. The rusted rides loomed out of the trees like skeletal remains, and the air was thick with the scent of decay and damp earth. At first, the thrill of discovery kept the fear at bay. We wandered through the park, marveling at the derelict Ferris wheel, crumbling roller coasters, and the faded carnival booths. Everything was frozen in time, as if the park had been abandoned in a hurry, with tickets still in the machines and toys still scattered on the ground. But as the sun began to set, the atmosphere changed. The shadows grew longer, the silence heavier, and the sense of being watched became impossible to ignore. It was as if the park was alive, waiting for something, or someone. We split up, each of us eager to explore different parts of the park. I found myself drawn to the funhouse. Entrance a gaping mouth with chipped, peeling paint. Inside, the air was stale, and the mirrors were cracked and grimy. As I made my way through the maze of distorted reflections, I started hearing things. Whispers, faint and disjointed, echoing off the walls. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, or maybe the others messing with me. The voices grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, surrounding me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. When I finally stumbled out of the funhouse, disoriented and shaken, I realized that the others hadn't returned. The park was eerily quiet, the only sound the creak of the old Ferris wheel as it swayed in the wind. I called out, but there was no answer, just the echo of my own voice. Panic set in as I searched the park, my footsteps echoing through the empty rides and crumbling attractions. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every rustle of leaves felt like something, or someone, moving just out of sight. It wasn't long before I found the first sign of them. A single shoe, lying in the middle of the path, abandoned and covered in dirt. I picked it up, my heart racing, and called out again, louder this time. Still no answer. I kept searching, my fear growing with every step, until I found the next clue. Phone, smashed and half buried in the ground. The dread was suffocating now, wrapping around me like a vice. The park wasn't just abandoned, it was hunting us. Family retreat in the woods sounded like the perfect escape from the daily grind. We rented a cabin deep in the forest, miles away from civilization, where we could reconnect with nature and each other. Cabin was old, with creaky floors and a stone fireplace that promised cozy evenings by the fire. The first few days were peaceful, hiking, fishing, and stargazing without the distractions of modern life. But then we found the diary. Everything changed. It was hidden in a drawer in the bedroom, tucked beneath a stack of old papers. The leather cover was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. At first, it seemed like an ordinary journal, filled with mundane details about daily life in the cabin. But as we read further, the entries grew darker, more frantic. The writer spoke of strange noises in the night, of shadows that moved on their own, and of an overwhelming sense of dread that had settled over the cabin. The final entry was scrawled in a trembling hand, warning whoever found the diary to leave immediately. We laughed it off at first, dismissing it as the ramblings of someone who had spent too much time alone in the woods. But that night, the noises started. It began with a soft tapping on the windows, like fingernails scratching at the glass. We tried to ignore it, telling ourselves it was just the wind or some animal outside. But the tapping grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like it was coming from inside the cabin. The kids were scared, and so were we. But we tried to stay calm, hoping it would stop. The next morning, we found strange symbols etched into the wood outside the cabin. Crude, almost primitive markings that hadn't been there the day before. The air felt heavy, charged with a tension that made it hard to breathe. We decided to pack up and leave. Car wouldn't start. No matter what we tried, the engine refused to turn over, and we were stranded. The sense of dread that had been growing since we found the diary now felt suffocating, as if the cabin itself was alive, feeding off our fear. That night was worse. The noises returned, louder and closer than before. Footsteps in the hallway, whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The shadows in the corners of the room twisted and moved, forming shapes that vanished as soon as we tried to focus on them. Sleep was impossible, and we huddled together in the living room, fire casting flickering light that barely kept the darkness at bay. The cabin had become a prison. We were its captive. In the early hours of the morning, we decided to make a run for it. We grabbed what we could carry and headed into the woods, hoping to find help, or at least escape whatever was haunting the cabin. But the forest was thick, trees looming over us like dark sentinels. The path that had been so clear during the day was now a maze of shadows and dead ends. It felt like the forest itself was conspiring to keep us there, leading us in circles back to the cabin. As dawn broke, we found ourselves standing at the edge of the clearing, the cabin in front of us, unchanged and waiting. The diary's warning echoed in our minds, but there was no escape. We were trapped, caught in the grip of something ancient and malevolent. The cabin was more than just a building. It was a gateway, a place where the past lingered and refused to let go. And now, we were part of its story. In the end, we were found by a search party, days after we had first gone missing. They said we were delirious, half-mad from fear, but we knew the truth. The cabin still stands, waiting for its next visitors, secrets hidden in the shadows. If you ever find yourself tempted by the idea of a quiet retreat in the woods, be careful. Some places are better left undisturbed. I had always dreamed of a luxurious spa retreat, a place to unwind, relax, and let go of all the stress that had been weighing me down. When I found the secluded spa hidden away in the mountains, it seemed like a dream come true. The brochure promised complete serenity, with mineral baths, massages, and a stunning view of the surrounding forest. I couldn't wait to escape the hustle and bustle of life and immerse myself in tranquility. The journey there was long and winding, but when I finally arrived, the spa was as beautiful as I had imagined. The staff welcomed me warmly, their smiles wide and almost too perfect. They ushered me to my room, which overlooked the lush greenery of the forest. Everything seemed ideal. The air was crisp, the atmosphere serene, and I felt my stress melt away. My first day was filled with pampering, from soothing massages to aromatic baths. I couldn't have been happier. But as evening fell, I started to notice that something wasn't quite right. The other guests were too quiet, their eyes distant, almost vacant. When I tried to strike up a conversation, they would smile politely but say nothing, as if they were in a trance. That night, I struggled to sleep. The bed was comfortable enough, but the silence of the spa was unnerving. It wasn't just peaceful, it was oppressive, like the quiet before a storm. I tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The walls seemed to close in on me, and every creak of the floorboards sent a shiver down my spine. Eventually, I drifted off, but my sleep was restless, filled with strange, unsettling dreams of shadows moving in the corners of my room. The next morning, I noticed something odd. My belongings had been moved, nothing major, just small items out of place, as if someone had gone through them while I slept. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I had been too tired to notice where I had left things. But the unease gnawed at me, and as I went through the day's treatments, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The staff's smiles seemed forced now, their eyes cold and calculating. The other guests were even more distant, their expressions blank, as if they were sleepwalking through the day. As the days passed, the treatments grew more intense. The massages became painful, the baths scalding, and the food left me feeling weak and disoriented. I tried to voice my concerns, but the staff brushed them off, insisting that it was all part of the process. I would feel better soon. But I didn't feel better. I felt worse, like I was being drained of energy, my mind growing foggy and confused. The spa, once a haven, had become a prison, and I began to fear for my safety. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to explore the spa, hoping to find answers. As I wandered through the dark, empty hallways, I stumbled upon a locked door. The faint sound of whispers came from behind it, and my curiosity got the better of me. I managed to pick the lock, and inside I found a small, dimly lit room filled with medical equipment, IV bags, syringes, and machines that I didn't recognize. But what truly terrified me were the files scattered on the desk, detailing the spa's true purpose. The treatments weren't for relaxation. They were experiments designed to harvest something from the guests. I was nothing more than a subject in their twisted study. Panic surged through me as I realized I had to get out. I raced back to my room, packing my things as quietly as I could. But as I reached for the door, I heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, and far too close. The staff knew I had discovered their secret, and they weren't going to let me leave. Desperation took over, and I climbed out the window, fleeing into the night, the sounds of pursuit close behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road, where a passing car finally took me to safety. The spa is still out there, hidden in the mountains, waiting for its next unsuspecting guest. The memories of my time there haunt me, chilling reminder that sometimes relaxation can come at a terrible price. If you ever find yourself tempted by a secluded spa, be careful. Not all retreats are what they seem. I had always dreamed of leading a wilderness expedition, guiding a group of adventurers through the untouched beauty of the remote wilderness. When the opportunity finally came, I jumped at the chance. The area was a vast, untamed stretch of land, miles from the nearest town, filled with dense forests, towering mountains, and crystal-clear lakes. It was the kind of place that made you feel like you were stepping back in time, far away from the modern world. Our group was a mix of seasoned hikers and eager newcomers, all excited to embark on the journey. But from the very beginning, something felt off. The first few days were uneventful, challenging, but nothing out of the ordinary. We hiked through dense forests, camped under the stars, and marveled at the beauty of the untouched landscape. But as we ventured deeper into the wilderness, the atmosphere began to change. The forest grew darker, the trees taller and more oppressive, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sun. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of an animal. The further we went, the more the sense of unease grew. It started with small things, items going missing from our packs, strange sounds in the night that none of us could explain. We tried to brush it off, telling ourselves it was just the natural sounds of the wilderness, but the tension in the group was palpable. Then we found the footprints, large, deep imprints in the soft earth. far too big to be human. They appeared out of nowhere, crisscrossing our path and leading off into the trees. We followed them for a while, curious, but they eventually disappeared, leaving us with more questions than answers. That night, the forest came alive with noises. We heard branches snapping, distant growls, and the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. The fire seemed to offer little comfort as the shadows danced around us, and I could see the fear in the eyes of the others. We were no longer alone in the wilderness. Something was watching us, tracking us, and it wasn't friendly. I tried to keep everyone calm, but the sense of dread was overwhelming, like a dark cloud hanging over us. The next morning, one of the group members was missing. His tent was empty, his belongings untouched, but there was no sign of him. We searched the surrounding area, calling his name, but the forest swallowed our voices, offering no clues. The footprints reappeared, leading away from the campsite and into the dense woods. We followed them, but they eventually vanished once again, leaving us lost and confused. The realization that we were being hunted by something we couldn't see or understand sent a wave of panic through the group. As the days wore on, the wilderness became a maze of twisted trees and endless paths that seemed to lead nowhere. We were disoriented, exhausted, and terrified, our nerves frayed by the constant sense of being watched. Footprints appeared and disappeared at random, always just ahead of us, as if whatever was out there was toying with us. The once beautiful landscape now felt like a trap, and every step we took seemed to bring us closer to whatever was stalking us. One by one, the group members started disappearing. It was always the same. One moment they were with us, the next they were gone, leaving behind nothing but their abandoned gear. Fear was suffocating, and the few of us who remained knew we had to find a way out before it was too late. We tried to retrace our steps, but the forest seemed to shift around us. The paths we had taken now overgrown and unfamiliar. The wilderness had become a labyrinth, and we were hopelessly lost. In the end, only 2 of us made it out. We stumbled upon a ranger station, half mad from fear and exhaustion, barely able to explain what had happened. The rangers launched a search, but they never found the others, and the official story was that they had succumbed to the elements. But I know the truth. The wilderness out there is alive, and it doesn't take kindly to intruders. If you ever find yourself tempted to explore the remote wilderness, be careful. Some places are wild for a reason. When my partner and I booked the remote Airbnb for a weekend getaway, we were looking for peace and quiet, a break from the city, and a chance to reconnect with nature. The listing promised a charming cabin in the woods, far from any neighbors, with stunning views and total privacy. It sounded perfect. The drive out there was long and winding, taking us deeper into the forest until we finally reached the cabin. It was exactly as advertised, quaint, cozy, and nestled among towering trees. First, it felt like the perfect escape. First night was peaceful enough. We spent the evening by the fireplace, sipping wine and enjoying the solitude. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the distant calls of the forest. But as we settled in, little things started to feel off. The cabin was too quiet, almost unnaturally so. The wind outside seemed to whisper through the trees, and the darkness pressed against the windows like a living thing. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that we were just unused to the isolation. But the feeling of unease lingered. The next morning, I noticed that some of our belongings had been moved. Nothing major, just small items out of place, as if someone had gone through them. My partner insisted that I was imagining things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The cabin felt different in the daylight, the shadows deeper, silence more oppressive. When I went to check my phone, I found that we had no signal. The Wi-Fi, which had worked the night before, was now down. We were completely cut off from the outside world. That evening, as the sun set, we decided to take a walk through the woods. Air was crisp, the leaves crunching under our feet, but the further we went, the more disoriented we became. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees taller and more twisted than they had appeared during the day. When we tried to find our way back, the path we had taken was gone, replaced by a tangle of undergrowth that made it impossible to see where we were going. Panic set in as we realized we were lost. After what felt like hours of wandering, we finally stumbled upon the cabin. Something was wrong. The door was slightly ajar, and the lights inside were flickering. We hadn't left it that way. My heart raced as we approached, every instinct screaming that something was very, very wrong. When we stepped inside, the air was thick with tension, and I could feel eyes on us, watching from the shadows. The cabin, once so cozy, now felt like a trap. That night, the noises started. Soft at first, like footsteps on the porch, then louder, like someone, or something, moving through the cabin. We bolted the doors and windows, but the sense of being watched never left. I could hear whispers, faint and unintelligible, drifting through the walls. My partner tried to reassure me, but I could see the fear in their eyes. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just the wind or the creaking of an old cabin. It was something more. In the early hours of the morning, we decided to leave. We packed our bags in a hurry, but when we tried to start the car, it wouldn't turn over. The engine sputtered and died, and we were trapped. The fear was suffocating, and we knew we had to find another way out. We decided to hike out to the nearest town. But as we stepped outside, the woods seemed darker, more hostile, and the path we had taken before was gone. The cabin loomed behind us, its windows like black eyes staring into the night. In the end, we managed to find a road and flagged down a passing car. We left everything behind, not daring to look back. The cabin, with its secrets, still stands, waiting for the next unsuspecting guests. The memories of that weekend haunt us, chilling reminder that not every escape is a refuge. If you ever find yourself tempted by the idea of a remote getaway, be careful. Isolation has a way of revealing things you might not want to see. We had no idea where the train came from. It appeared out of nowhere, its whistle echoing through the night as it rolled into the old, abandoned station. Tracks had long been overgrown, and the station itself was a crumbling relic of a bygone era. Yet here it was, a gleaming vintage train, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. We had been wandering the town looking for something to do when we saw it pull in. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to investigate. After all, how often do you stumble upon a ghost train? As we approached, the train doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a lavish interior straight out of the 1920s. Plush seats, ornate fixtures, and the faint sound of jazz music playing in the background. It was like stepping back in time, and for a moment, we were mesmerized by the elegance of it all. There was no one else around, no conductor, no passenger, just the empty train waiting for us. Against our better judgment, we climbed aboard, eager to see where it would take us. The train started moving as soon as we sat down, gliding smoothly along the tracks. The landscape outside the windows blurred by in the darkness, and the sense of unease that had been lingering at the edge of my mind grew stronger. There was something wrong about this train, something unsettling beneath the surface. The lights flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows on the walls, and the music seemed to warp and distort as if playing from a damaged record. But it wasn't until we tried to leave that we realized just how trapped we were. We got up to explore the train, hoping to find some clue as to where it was headed. But no matter how far we walked, cars all looked the same, empty and endless, stretching on into infinity. The doors at the end of each car led to more of the same, as if the train were a looping maze with no way out. Panic set in as we realized we were stuck, with no way to stop the train or contact the outside world. The windows, once clear, were now dark and impenetrable, showing nothing but blackness. The train began to change as we wandered through it. The elegant decor gave way to something more sinister. Torn seats, shattered windows, and strange symbols scratched into the walls. The air grew colder, and the soft jazz music turned into a discordant wail, like the sound of metal grinding against metal. We could hear whispers now, faint and disembodied, as if the train itself were alive, filled with the voices of those who had ridden it before us. The realization hit us hard. We weren't the first to board this train, and we wouldn't be the last. As the hours dragged on, the train took us through a nightmarish landscape. Twisted, barren trees, desolate wastelands, and strange, ghostly figures that flickered in and out of view. Time seemed to lose all meaning, and we had no idea how long we had been on the train or where it was taking us. The sense of dread was suffocating, and every turn of the train's wheels felt like it was pulling us deeper into some dark, forgotten place. We tried everything to escape, prying open doors, smashing windows. Nothing worked. The train had us, and it wasn't letting go. In the end, we found ourselves back where we started. The same car, the same seats, but with one crucial difference. The station was gone, replaced by a vast empty void. The train had stopped. There was nowhere to go. The doors remained sealed, and the whispers grew louder, filling the car with a cacophony of voices. It felt like we were being drawn into the train itself, becoming a part of it, just like the others who had come before. We realized then that this was our fate, to ride the ghost train forever, trapped between worlds. If you ever see a train pull into an abandoned station late at night, don't board it. No matter how tempting it may seem, no matter how curious you are, resist the urge, because once you're on, there's no getting off. The ghost train has a way of taking you places you never wanted to go. We hadn't been back to the old summer camp in years. It was the place where we'd made some of our best memories as kids. Long days by the lake, nights around the campfire, and endless games in the woods. But when the camp closed down after a mysterious accident, we all drifted apart, and the place faded into the background of our lives. Then, out of the blue, one of us suggested a reunion. A chance to relive those carefree days and see how much the place had changed. The idea seemed harmless enough at the time, so we agreed to meet there for one last adventure. When we arrived, the camp was a shadow of its former self. The cabins were falling apart, the docks had rotted away, and the woods had reclaimed much of the land. But despite the decay, there was something comforting about being back, a sense of nostalgia that made us forget the rumors about what had happened all those years ago. We set up camp near the old mess hall, cracking jokes and reminiscing about the good times. But as the sun began to set, the atmosphere shifted. The camp, once filled with laughter and life, now felt eerie and abandoned, as if it had been waiting for us all this time. That first night around the campfire, we heard it. Distant, haunting music drifting through the trees. It was faint at first, almost like a lullaby, but unmistakable. We exchanged uneasy glances, trying to laugh it off as someone's prank. But the music didn't stop, grew louder, more insistent, until it filled the air with a sense of dread. We decided to investigate, thinking maybe some other campers had the same idea as us. But when we followed the sound to its source, we found nothing. Just an old, dilapidated cabin at the edge of the woods, its windows dark and empty. As the days went on, the strange occurrences multiplied. We found old, faded photographs of ourselves scattered around the camp, pictures that none of us remembered taking. The cabins, once familiar, seemed to shift and change when we weren't looking, their interiors dark and cold, as if they had been abandoned for much longer than they should have been. Shadows moved in the corners of our vision, and the old campgrounds echoed with voices that didn't belong to any of us. It was as if the camp itself was alive, twisting our memories and feeding on our fear. Then, one by one, we started to disappear. It always happened the same way. Someone would wander off, lured by the sound of that haunting music, or the sight of something familiar in the distance, and they wouldn't come back. We searched the camp, calling their names. There was no trace of them. It was as if they had been swallowed by the woods, lost to whatever dark force had taken over the camp. The fear was suffocating, and the sense of dread that had been building since we arrived now hung over us like a dark cloud. Final night, I was alone. The others were gone, and I could feel the camp closing in around me. Music was louder now, echoing through the trees, and I could hear footsteps just beyond the edge of the firelight. I knew I had to leave. The camp seemed determined to keep me there. Paths through the woods twisted and turned, leading me back to the same spot over and over again. The cabins loomed out of the darkness like silent sentinels, and the voices in the woods grew louder, more insistent. In the end, I barely made it out. I stumbled through the woods, disoriented and terrified, until I found the main road. The camp, with its twisted memories and dark secrets, was behind me. Fear stayed with me. I never saw my friends again, and the camp remains abandoned, hidden away in the woods like a ghost of the past. If you ever find yourself tempted to revisit an old summer camp, think twice. Some places are better left in the past where they belong. The idea of a weekend getaway at a luxury hotel in the mountains sounded perfect. The hotel was famous for its stunning views, cozy fireplaces, and gourmet dining, a winter wonderland where we could relax and forget about the world. We arrived just as a blizzard was starting to set in, the snow falling thick and fast, transforming the landscape into a pristine white blanket. The hotel staff greeted us warmly. Everything seemed idyllic. But as the storm intensified, trapping us inside, the atmosphere began to shift. The hotel, once a haven of comfort, now felt isolated and oppressive. At first, it was just the small things, the way the hallways seemed too long, the way the lights flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows on the walls. The other guests kept to themselves, and the staff, while polite, seemed distant, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. The storm raged outside, cutting us off from the rest of the world, and the sense of isolation grew stronger. The hotel's grandeur started to feel like a facade, hiding something darker beneath the surface. First night, we heard strange noises coming from the floors above us, footsteps pacing back and forth, doors creaking open and shut, and the faint sound of laughter that didn't seem to belong to anyone staying there. We tried to ignore it, telling ourselves it was just the wind or the old building settling. But the noises persisted, growing louder and more unsettling as the night wore on. Felt like the hotel was alive, its walls whispering secrets that we weren't meant to hear. The next day, we discovered that some of the other guests had disappeared. Their rooms were empty, their belongings still there, but there was no sign of them. The staff offered vague explanations, insisting that they had left early because of the storm, but their stories didn't add up. The tension in the hotel was palpable, and we could feel the fear spreading among the remaining guests. It was as if the hotel itself was feeding on our anxiety, growing stronger with each passing hour. That night, the power went out. The hotel was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the flickering flames of the fireplaces. The storm outside howled like a wild animal, and the sounds from above grew louder, heavy footsteps. Something large and menacing was moving through the hallways. We huddled together in the lobby, the sense of dread suffocating. No one dared to go upstairs, not after what we had heard. As the night wore on, we realized we weren't alone in the hotel. Shadows moved in the corners of our vision, and we could hear whispers, faint, disembodied voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The temperature dropped, and a thick fog seemed to seep into the building, making it hard to see or breathe. It felt like the hotel was closing in on us, trapping us in a nightmare that had no escape. By morning, more guests were missing, and the staff had vanished entirely. We tried to leave, but the snowdrifts outside were too deep, the roads impassable. We were trapped with no way to contact the outside world. The hotel, once so grand and inviting, now felt like a prison, and we were its captives. The fear was suffocating, and every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind made our hearts race. In the end, we were the only ones left. The hotel had taken the others, swallowed them whole, and we knew it was only a matter of time before it came for us too. Desperation drove us to try and find a way out. The hotel was a maze of endless hallways and locked doors. The storm outside raged on, and the hotel seemed to pulse with a dark energy, beating on our terror. When the storm finally broke, rescue teams found us, half mad with fear, barely able to speak. They said we had been snowed in for days, but to us it had felt like an eternity. The hotel still stands, silent and imposing, but we know better than to go back. If you ever find yourself tempted by the allure of a snowbound hotel, think twice. Sometimes isolation is more than just being alone. cliffside retreat was advertised as a secluded paradise, a house perched on the edge of the world with stunning views of the ocean below. It was the kind of place people went to escape, find peace and quiet far from the noise of everyday life. We booked it for a weekend getaway, hoping to relax and unwind. The house was as breathtaking as the photos, modern, sleek, and surrounded by nothing but the endless horizon of the sea. But from the moment we arrived, there was an odd feeling in the air, like the house itself was waiting for something. The first night, we were mesmerized by the beauty of the place. The waves crashed against the rocks far below, the stars shone brightly in the sky, and the sound of the ocean lulled us into a false sense of security. But as we settled in, strange things began to happen. It started with the lights, flickering on and off at random, casting the rooms in an eerie glow. We tried to brush it off as faulty wiring. The feeling of unease was hard to shake. The house, despite its beauty, felt cold and unwelcoming. The second day, we explored the property, baking in the stunning views and the precariousness of the cliff's edge. The drop was sheer, the ocean below unforgiving. We found a small path that led to a secluded beach, but something about it felt wrong, like we were being watched. The wind whipped around us, and the sense of danger was palpable. We returned to the house, trying to shake off the unease, but it followed us inside, clinging to the walls like a dark shadow. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, we heard a strange sound, faint, rhythmic clicking coming from somewhere within the house. It was too deliberate to be the wind or the settling of the structure. We searched for the source, but found nothing. The sound continued, growing louder, echoing through the hallways. The house, once so silent, now felt alive with noise, each creak and groan amplifying our fear. We tried to sleep, but the sound followed us into our dreams, turning them into nightmares. The next morning, we discovered the first trap. It was subtle, a loose floorboard in the hallway that gave way when stepped on, revealing a sharp drop beneath. If we hadn't been careful, someone could have been seriously hurt. We dismissed it as an accident. But as the day went on, more traps were revealed. The railing on the balcony was loose, the stairs creaked ominously, and the heavy doors slammed shut with enough force to break a bone. It felt like the house itself was trying to harm us, testing our limits, pushing us closer to the edge, both literally and figuratively. By the final night, the atmosphere in the house was unbearable. The clicking sound had grown louder, more insistent, and the traps more dangerous. We could feel the house closing in on us, every corner hiding some new threat. The view of the ocean, once so beautiful, now seemed like a gaping maw, ready to swallow us whole. The sense of impending doom was overwhelming, and we knew we had to leave. But the house wasn't going to let us go so easily. In a desperate attempt to escape, we packed our bags and made a run for the car. But the house had other plans. Final trap was waiting for us. The driveway, slick with rain, led directly to the edge of the cliff. As we tried to leave, the car skidded, teetering dangerously close to the precipice. We barely managed to get out in time, abandoning the car and fleeing on foot. The house loomed behind us, silent and still, but we knew it wasn't done with us. The memories of that weekend haunt us, a chilling reminder that beauty can hide darkness. If you ever find yourself tempted by the allure of a cliffside retreat, remember, what looks like paradise from a distance might be a trap waiting to spring. The cliffside retreat was advertised as a secluded paradise, a house perched on the edge of the world with stunning views of the ocean below. It was the kind of place people went to escape, to find peace and quiet, far from the noise of everyday life. We booked it for a weekend getaway, hoping to relax and unwind. The house was as breathtaking as the photos. Modern, sleek, and surrounded by nothing but the endless horizon of the sea. But from the moment we arrived, there was an odd feeling in the air, like the house itself was waiting for something. First night, we were mesmerized by the beauty of the place. The waves crashed against the rocks far below, stars shone brightly in the sky, and the sound of the ocean lulled us into a false sense of security. But as we settled in, strange things began to happen. It started with the lights, flickering on and off at random, casting the rooms in an eerie glow. We tried to brush it off as faulty wiring, but the feeling of unease was hard to shake. The house, despite its beauty, felt cold and unwelcoming. The second day, we explored the property, taking in the stunning views and the precariousness of the cliff's edge. The drop was sheer, the ocean below unforgiving. We found a small path that led to a secluded beach, but something about it felt wrong, like we were being watched. The wind whipped around us, and the sense of danger was palpable. We returned to the house, trying to shake off the unease, but it followed us inside, clinging to the walls like a dark shadow. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, we heard a strange sound, a faint, rhythmic clicking coming from somewhere within the house. It was too deliberate to be the wind or the settling of the structure. We searched for the source but found nothing. The sound continued, growing louder, echoing through the hallways. The house, once so silent, now felt alive with noise, each creak and groan amplifying our fear. We tried to sleep. The sound followed us into our dreams, turning them into nightmares. The next morning, we discovered the first trap. It was subtle. A loose floorboard in the hallway that gave way when stepped on, revealing a sharp drop beneath. If we hadn't been careful, someone could have been seriously hurt. We dismissed it as an accident, but as the day went on, more traps were revealed. The railing on the balcony was loose, the stairs creaked ominously, and the heavy doors slammed shut with enough force to break a bone. Felt like the house itself was trying to harm us, testing our limits, pushing us closer to the edge, both literally and figuratively. By the final night, the atmosphere in the house was unbearable. Clicking sound had grown louder, more insistent, and the traps more dangerous. We could feel the house closing in on us, every corner hiding some new threat. The view of the ocean, once so beautiful, now seemed like a gaping maw, ready to swallow us whole. The sense of impending doom was overwhelming, and we knew we had to leave. But the house wasn't going to let us go so easily. In a desperate attempt to escape, we packed our bags and made a run for the car. The house had other plans. Final trap was waiting for us. The driveway, slick with rain, led directly to the edge of the cliff. As we tried to leave, the car skidded, teetering dangerously close to the precipice. We barely managed to get out in time, abandoning the car and fleeing on foot. The house loomed behind us, silent and still. But we knew it wasn't done with us. The memories of that weekend haunt us, chilling reminder that beauty can hide darkness. If you ever find yourself tempted by the allure of a cliffside retreat, remember, what looks like paradise from a distance might be a trap waiting to spring. It was supposed to be a straightforward hunting trip. Just me and a few buddies heading out to a remote cabin deep in the woods. The cabin was miles from the nearest town, a rugged little place with no electricity, no running water, and no cell signal. But that was the point. We wanted to get away from it all, to spend a few days living off the land and enjoying the peace and quiet of the wilderness. The first day went as planned, hunting, cooking over an open fire, and swapping stories around the campfire. But as night fell, the woods around us began to feel less like a retreat and more like a threat. The first sign that something was wrong came when we found the tracks. They were too large to be from any animal we knew, and they circled our cabin, leading off into the trees. At first, we laughed it off, figuring it was just a bear or some other wildlife. But the tracks didn't look right. There was something unsettling about them, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We tried to ignore it, but the sense of unease lingered, growing stronger with each passing hour. That night, we heard the noises. Strange, guttural sounds coming from the woods, like something was out there, just beyond the reach of our firelight. We grabbed our rifles and stood guard, but whatever it was stayed hidden in the shadows. Sounds grew louder, more insistent, and we could hear the crunch of leaves and the snap of branches as it moved closer. We shone our flashlights into the trees. There was nothing there, just the dark, impenetrable woods, filled with the echoes of something we couldn't see. The next morning, we found more tracks, fresh ones, leading right up to the cabin door. Whatever it was had been watching us while we slept. The fear that had been gnawing at us all night now turned into full-blown panic. We decided to cut the trip short and leave, but when we tried to start the truck, it wouldn't budge. The engine was dead and the tires had been slashed. We were stranded, miles from help, with no way to contact anyone. The sense of isolation was suffocating, and the realization that we were being hunted by something we couldn't understand was terrifying. As the day wore on, the woods seemed to close in around us. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch felt like a threat. We could feel eyes on us, watching our every move. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional sound, whatever was stalking us. We fortified the cabin as best we could, boarding up the windows and barricading the doors, but it didn't feel like enough. The woods were alive with menace, and we knew it was only a matter of time before whatever was out there made its move. That night, the attacks began. It started with the sounds, scratching at the walls, banging on the doors, and that same guttural growl that sent chills down our spines. We huddled together, clutching our rifles. There was nothing to shoot at. The cabin, once our refuge, now felt like a trap. Fear was palpable, and every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind felt like a precursor to something worse. The night dragged on, endless and terrifying, and we knew that if we didn't find a way out, we wouldn't survive. In the early hours of the morning, we made a break for it. We grabbed what we could carry and ran into the woods, hoping to find the main road or a ranger station. But the woods were a maze of shadows and twisted trees, and it felt like we were being herded, pushed deeper into the wilderness. The sounds followed us, growing louder, more aggressive, until it felt like the very forest was hunting us. By some miracle, we found the road and flagged down a passing car. We never looked back, too afraid of what we might see. The cabin is still out there, deep in the woods, waiting for its next visitors. The memories of that trip haunt us. Chilling reminder that the wilderness is not as empty as it seems. If you ever find yourself tempted by the idea of a backwoods hunting trip, remember, sometimes you're not the only one out there.